I was 16 or 17 when this happened. A poor high school student from the rural Moldavia Republic, studying in Romania on a scholarship that covered most of my expenses. I'm 28 now, but the memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine. It was after winter vacation, and I was returning to my school in Romania by train from my hometown, about 300 kilometers away. The train station was in a desolate part of town, surrounded by nothing but empty fields and darkness for nearly a kilometer. No apartment buildings, no signs of life, just a vast, eerie void. The train pulled into the station at 11 p.m., right when the buses stopped running. This was Romania, so there was no reliable schedule to count on. I was alone, stepping off the train into the cold, dark night. The high school campus dorm was a significant walk away, and taking a taxi was out of the question. Too expensive for my tight budget. I didn't want to bother my friends or classmates either. So, being the stubborn teenager I was, I decided I'd walk to the nearest bus stop. If I got lucky, maybe a bus would still be running. If not, I figured I could handle the hour-long trek to the campus on foot. As I stepped out of the station, the area felt like a ghost town. The only signs of habitation were a few scattered Romani shacks, gypsy homes, as some might call them, dotting the edges of the emptiness. The air was biting, and the darkness seemed to swallow everything beyond the faint glow of the station's lights. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking toward the campus, my footsteps crunching on the gravel path. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind. A few minutes into my walk, a strange sensation crept over me. I thought I heard something behind me, faint like a shuffle or a step. My stomach twisted with unease, but I brushed it off as paranoia and quickened my pace, my breath visible in the chilly air. Seconds later, the sound grew clearer, and then a voice cut through the night, raspy and unsettling. "Hey, beauty, why in such a hurry? Wait for me." My heart lurched. The words dripped with a menace that made my skin crawl, and I couldn't muster the courage to look back. Fear rooted me to the spot for a moment, but I forced my legs to move faster, my shoes pounding against the ground. The voice didn't stop. "Now that's not nice. Where do you think you're going?" It taunted, closer now. I could hear his footsteps, heavy and deliberate, keeping pace with mine. Panic surged through me, and I pushed myself to walk as fast as I could without breaking into a run, my pulse hammering in my ears. The area around me was pitch black, silent except for his voice and the crunch of his steps. There were no houses, no people, no streets with traffic, nothing but the endless dark and the stranger closing in. I didn't have a cell phone. This was over a decade ago in Romania, and I was too poor to afford one. I was utterly alone. Desperate, I stole a glance over my shoulder. In the dim moonlight, I saw him, a dirty, shaggy man in his 30s, his eyes glinting with something predatory. Terror flooded my body, erasing any attempt to stay calm. I broke into a sprint, running as fast as my legs could carry me toward the nearest populated street I could think of. My lungs burned, and my backpack bounced painfully against my spine. But I didn't care. I could hear him running too, his footsteps pounding closer, his breath ragged. He was gaining on me. "Where do you think you're going?" he yelled, his voice thick with anger now. Only steps behind me. I reached the street with some signs of life. Dim street lights and an occasional car in the distance. He was so close I could feel his presence, like a shadow about to engulf me. Just as I thought I couldn't run any farther, I saw a small bus approaching. I wasn't near a bus stop, but desperation took over. I waved my arms frantically, gesturing for the driver to stop, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Miraculously, the driver noticed me. The bus slowed, its brakes squealing, and I scrambled toward it as the doors hissed open. I threw myself inside, panting and trembling, and the doors closed behind me just as the man reached the bus. Through the glass, I saw him grab at the handle, his face contorted with rage as he tried to yank the door open. But it was too late. The bus lurched forward, pulling away from the curb. I collapsed into a seat, my chest heaving, still shaking from the adrenaline. The driver glanced back at me through the rear view mirror. "I saw that guy chasing you," he said, his voice calm but concerned. "You looked panicked, so I stopped." I thanked him profusely, my voice shaky, barely able to string words together. I'm not religious, but in that moment, it felt like some higher power had sent that bus to save me, right in the nick of time. As the bus rumbled toward the campus, I stared out the window into the dark, my mind replaying the chase. The man's raspy voice, his footsteps, his angry shouts. They echoed in my head, a reminder how close I'd come to something terrible. I hugged my backpack tighter, grateful for the warmth of the bus and the driver's quick thinking. That night, I made it to the dorm, but the fear lingered, a shadow that would follow me for years. Back in 2007, I landed a tech job at a small call center for an IP phone VoIP company called DT1 Long Distance. The company was a mess. Honestly, it felt like a pyramid scheme, and I'm still not sure how they stayed in business as long as they did. Thankfully, I was on the IT side, so I didn't have to peddle their shady services. My role was straightforward. Handle tech support calls from customers reporting outages or issues with DT1 lines, quests, and the like. It was a typical call center gig, but I was the only woman on my team, which meant I had to work twice as hard to prove I could keep up with my male colleagues. It didn't take long, though. Soon enough, customers respected me for my ability to troubleshoot and get things done. After making my mark, I decided to take on the 10-hour night shifts, Wednesday through Saturday, from 1 p.m. to 12 a.m., with an hour for lunch. The night shift suited me because it gave me 3 days off instead of 2, which felt like a luxury. The catch? After 6 p.m., the office cleared out like a stampede. Everyone was desperate to leave, and I couldn't blame them. The building was eerie when it was empty. That left me completely alone for most of the night. Just me, the hum of computers, and the occasional ping of an email or call. The shift was slow, so I filled the time with video games, reading schoolwork, or writing to break the monotony. I'd sometimes wander the building, stretching my legs and exploring the quiet halls just to get away from my desk. I had the VoIP phone system forwarded to my cell phone, so I wouldn't miss any calls, which gave me the freedom to roam, whether it was to grab a soda or some food from the break room. The vending machine was in the basement, a place I didn't love visiting. The basement had a wall of windows and a single set of security doors at the main entrance, monitored by one lonely camera. It wasn't exactly a fortress, and it didn't feel safe. The back of the building faced an acre of dark, dense woods, with an unlit walking path that disappeared into the trees. No one ever explained why the path wasn't lit, but added to the creepy atmosphere. Sometimes, I catch glimpses of animals darting past windows, their eyes glinting in the moonlight. Other times, I get an unshakable feeling that someone was watching me from the darkness. I always try to make my basement trips quick, grabbing my soda or snack and hurrying back upstairs, but the unease lingered. One night, during a particularly slow and dragging shift, I decided I needed a caffeine boost to keep me going. It was around 9 p.m., and I was exhausted, with hours still left before I could leave. I counted my change as I walked down to the basement, making sure I had enough coins to get in and out fast. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the concrete walls. As I approached the vending machine, I caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. Something darted from the glass door back into the darkness outside. I froze, my heart skipping a beat, and scanned the woods beyond the windows. Nothing but blackness stared back. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and head back to my desk, but I shook off the feeling. It was just one noise, I told myself. I was in a secure building with locked doors. I briskly walked to the vending machine, punched in my selection, and waited as the soda clunked into the tray. As I bent down to grab it, a loud ping echoed through the basement, like someone had struck the glass door with a small object. My stomach dropped. I slowly turned, dreading what I might see, but the windows revealed nothing, just the same impenetrable darkness. My pulse quickened, and I decided this was my cue to get the hell out of there. I didn't bother with the elevator. I bolted for stairs, taking them two at a time, my heart racing from the combination of the creepy basement, the sudden noise, and the sprint up 2 flights. Back at my desk, I sank into my chair, trying to calm my nerves. It was just one sound, I repeated to myself. The building was locked, the inner offices secure. I was safe, but the unease wouldn't leave. That nagging feeling of being watched crept back, stronger now. I peered over the cubicle wall, scanning the office for anything out of place. Everything seemed normal, until I turned toward the front of the building. Outside the first set of glass doors, a slender, tall man stood, his hands cupped around his eyes to peer past the reflective lights inside. He was dirty, his clothes ragged, and his face looked bruised or smeared with grime. I couldn't tell which. My breath caught in my throat. I ducked back down before he could spot me, my heart pounding. This wasn't someone I recognized from the office, and at a little past 9 p.m., there was no good reason for him to be lurking outside. As I crouched in my chair, I heard the door rattle, like he was testing the handle. I stood slowly, just enough to peek over the cubicle wall, and watched as he tugged at the doors. They didn't budge, to my relief, but then he turned and locked eyes with me. His gaze was cold and intense, and it sent a chill down my spine. He started banging on the glass, harder now, his hands smacking against the door with force. I was terrified, alone in the middle of the night, in an isolated office building complex, with this stranger trying to get in. I grabbed my headset, my hand shaking, and dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm and direct. 911, what's your emergency? I stammered. My name is, I work at... I need someone to come out. There's a guy trying to break into my office building. As I spoke, the man paced back and forth outside, moving from one side of the glass doors to the other, his eyes never leaving the building. I tried to track his movements, but suddenly he vanished from view. I strained to see where he'd gone, my heart racing. He wouldn't just walk away, not after banging that hard. Out of nowhere, a good-sized rock hurtled through the air and smashed against the door with a deafening crash. I screamed and dove under my desk, clutching the phone. What just happened? The operator asked, her voice sharp with concern. A rock. It smashed against a glass door. I whispered, my voice trembling. She asked if the glass was broken enough to let him in. I didn't want to look, but she urged me to check so I'd know where he was. Crawling out from under my desk, I peeked over the cubicle wall and saw a huge crack running down the first door. My stomach sank. I slid back down and told her, "Please have the police hurry." The wait felt like an eternity. Another smash hit the door, this time accompanied by the sickening sound of glass shattering. My blood ran cold. But then, like a miracle, I heard sirens approaching, their wail cutting through the night. I told the operator the police were arriving and thanked her for staying on the line. Standing cautiously, I peered over the cubicle wall. Red and blue lights flashed wildly outside, illuminating the parking lot. The top part of the door was completely shattered, and a rock lay on the floor inside the entryway. The man was gone. One officer came to the front door, while others searched the area, their flashlights sweeping the parking lot. The officer who greeted me was kind and patient, letting me explain what I'd seen through my shaky voice. Soon, my boss arrived, checking on me and assessing the damage. At some point, my husband was called, and I was told an officer would escort me home. I took the next few days off, my nerves too frayed to return immediately. During that time, I started looking for a new job, one where I wouldn't be alone at night. When I gave my statement to the police, I mentioned a theory. The man might have been connected to an ex-co-worker who'd been fired a few weeks earlier for stealing and no-showing. That co-worker knew the office schedule, knew when people came and went, and knew where we kept the cell phones we sold, smartphones, Blackberries, VoIP boxes, and phone cards, all stashed under a desk, fly, not locked away. It was plausible the fired co-worker had sent someone to break in. A month later, I left DT1 for a job at a credit card machine company. Another call center, but bustling with people, complete with security and cameras everywhere. It felt safer, like I could finally breathe again. The DT1 company was eventually bought out and liquidated, its assets stripped for whatever they were worth. But that night in the office, alone with a stranger trying to break in, still haunts me. The sound of the rock hitting the glass, the sight of his bruised face through the door. It's a memory I can't shake, a reminder how vulnerable I was in that empty building. This happened about 20 years ago at my parents' secluded lake cabin in deep South Texas, a place so remote it felt like the edge of the world. When I say secluded, I mean secluded. The cabin was a 40-minute drive from the nearest highway, 40 minutes from the closest town with a population of just 800, and over an hour from any city of notable size. The last 4 miles of the cabin were down a washed-out public dirt road, rutted and rough, winding through dense brush and towering pines. The road ended in a tight turnaround right in front of our cabin, making it the last accessible property. There was one more cabin beyond ours, but it could only be reached by a private driveway, hidden from view. On one side of the road loomed a steep cliff, its jagged face barely visible in the moonlight. On the other side was our cabin, a modest wooden structure perched on a gentle slope, with a grassy tract about 80 feet wide stretching from the porch to the water's edge. A small pier jutted out into the lake, next to a patch of dense woods, maybe 2 acres deep, that gave way to a swampy, mosquito-ridden marsh leading to the neighboring cabin. The layout created a funnel-like dead end, with our place trapped at the narrowest point. It was isolating, sometimes unnervingly so, and there were weeks when we'd go without seeing another soul. Many of the other cabins in the area were rarely visited. If not outright abandoned, their windows dark and their yards overgrown. That night, we'd gone into the city for a day of shopping, turning it into a full outing. By the time we got back to the cabin, it was 4 a.m., and we were all exhausted, our arms laden with bags and our eyes heavy from the long drive. The sky was pitch black, the stars obscured by a thick layer of clouds, and the air carried a damp chill. Knowing everyone would want to sleep in, I went around the cabin to close the big wooden shutters that covered the windows from the outside, hoping to block out the early morning sun. The shutters creaked as I pulled them down, their hinges rusty from years of lake air. Once inside, we all settled in, ready to crash. The cabin's sleeping quarters were one large room, a cozy but cramped space where 6 adults, my parents, my uncle, my aunt, and 2 family friends, and 2 teens, myself included, bunked together. The room smelled faintly of pine and old blankets, and the soft snores of my family began to fill the silence as everyone drifted off. Less than 5 minutes after I turned off all the lights, both indoor and outdoor, a pair of headlights pierced the darkness, sweeping across the room from the direction of the dirt road. It was startling, the beams cutting through the night like a warning. We all stirred, exchanging glances in the dim glow of a battery-powered lantern someone flicked on. At first, we assumed it was just fishermen, maybe heading to the lake to launch a boat before dawn. It wasn't unheard of, though it was rare for anyone to come this far out at such an hour. The vehicle, a van, reached the turnaround at the end of the road, spun around as if to head back the way it came, and then stopped. The engine idled, low and rumbling, and the headlights stayed on, pointed toward the woods. My stomach tightened. If they were leaving, why hadn't they gone already? Curiosity and unease pulled me to my feet. I crept to the only window on that side of the cabin, a small pane near the front door, and peered out. My uncle, a burly firefighter with a mix of toughness and nosiness, joined me, his broad frame casting a shadow across the floor. My dad, ever cautious, stayed back, quietly checking that our guns were within reach, just in case. We expected the people in the van to start messing with my uncle's truck, maybe trying to steal tools or gear from the bed. It wouldn't be the first time someone had tried to pilfer in these parts. But what we saw was far stranger and far more unsettling. In the faint moonlight, supplemented by the van's parking lights, We watched an adult man step out of the passenger side, followed by two young children. Boys, we thought, though it was hard to be sure. The driver then backed the van into the private driveway leading to the neighboring cabin, parked, and got out, carrying two long poles. My uncle and I later debated whether they were sticks or rifles. In the dim light, it was impossible to tell. The driver handed one pole to the other man. Both men were dressed for the cold, wearing long pants and jackets, their breath visible in the chilly air. But the kids, they were in thin pajama pants, no shirts, their bare torsos pale against the dark. They looked woefully underdressed, shivering visibly, and as we watched, we could hear them crying, their small voices carrying across the still night. The sound was heartbreaking, a mix of fear and confusion that made my chest ache. The men grabbed the boys by their arms and began leading them into the woods toward the swampy area beyond our pier. The children's cries grew louder, more desperate, as they stumbled through the underbrush. My heart raced, and a sick feeling settled in my gut. Something was horribly wrong. We stood frozen, our breath fogging the window, trying to process what we were seeing. Were these men their fathers? Kidnappers? What were they doing with those kids in the middle of the night? Panic surged through the room, and we whispered frantically, trying to decide what to do. Should we shout? Run out? Call for help? The isolation of the cabin, usually a comfort, now felt like a trap. My uncle, quick on his feet despite his size, made a split-second decision. He grabbed the keys to his truck and hit the panic button. The truck's alarm blared to life, a piercing wail that shattered the silence, its lights flashing wildly in the darkness. The effect was immediate. The van's engine roared, and it lurched forward, peeling out of the driveway with a screech of tires. The men, still gripping the boys, sprinted back from the woods and piled into the van, which tore off down the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust that glowed in the taillights. The whole thing happened so fast it felt surreal, like a nightmare unfolding in seconds. We rushed to the windows, trying to get a better look, but the shutters blocked most of our view. We could only make out the vague shape of the van as it disappeared around the bend. It was too dark to catch details. Color, make, license plate, nothing concrete. Frustration and fear mingled in the air as we realized how little we had to go on. My mom was the only one with a cell phone, but the signal out here was non-existent, except at the very end of the pier, where the lake opened up. With no time to waste, my dad, my uncle, and I each grabbed a gun from a cabinet, our hands trembling but resolute. We made the long trek out to the pier, the wooden boards creaking under our weight, the lake lapping softly against the pilings. The darkness pressed in, and every rustle in the woods made us jump, our guns trained on the shadows. My aunt and the others stayed behind, guarding the cabin, their faces pale with worry. At the end of the pier, we fumbled with the phone, struggling to get a signal. The bars flickered in and out, each failed attempt ratcheting up our anxiety. Finally, we got through to 911, and I poured out the story to the operator, my voice shaking as I described the van, the men, the crying children, and their march into the swamp. The operator listened, her tone calm but urgent, promising to send officers as quickly as possible. But we knew it would take time, too much time, for anyone to reach us out here. We hung up, the silence of the lake closing in again, and made our way back to the cabin, our eyes scanning the woods for any sign of the van's return. The police never caught them. By the time they arrived, the van was long gone, swallowed by the night in the endless backroads of rural Texas. We gave them what little description we had, but it wasn't enough. The officers searched the area, their flashlights cutting through the trees, but found no trace of the men or the boys. The incident left us shaken. The image of those crying children burned into our minds. We spent the rest of the night awake, the guns close, the shutters locked tight, jumping at every sound. The cabin, once a place of peace, felt tainted, its isolation now a source of dread rather than comfort. Looking back, I still wonder who those men were, what they intended for those boys, and why they chose that night, that place. The memory of their headlights, The sound of the children's sobs and the van's frantic escape haunt me. We never felt safe at the cabin the same way again, and though we returned many times, that night cast a long shadow over every visit, a reminder of how quickly the quiet of the wilderness could turn sinister. In the summer of 2015, I was 33, broke and jobless, living in Mexico City. My life had been spiraling downward for a couple of years, and my best friend had just moved back to Europe, leaving me restless and bored. So when an online friend, Harold, whom I had met in person 2 years earlier, invited me to spend a month at his farmhouse in Norway, I jumped at the chance. The deal was simple. In exchange for some work on the farm, I'd get a sweet holiday in a country I'd always dreamed of visiting. I had no issue with manual labor. In fact, I was eager to dive in. Since moving back to Mexico City from Canada in 2011, I felt rusty and out of shape, so the prospect of physical work was exciting. I packed my suitcase, laced up my boots, and said goodbye to Mexico City the best way I knew how, by getting thoroughly drunk. My journey to Norway was a mess from the start. I arrived at the airport in Stavanger, but my suitcase decided to take a detour to Thailand. After an hour of filling out lost luggage reports and providing Harold's address, I finally walked out to meet him. He was standing there, looking confused and annoyed, later admitting he'd almost left, thinking I had missed a flight. I guess I was lucky that night. I spent it with Harold and his friends in a cozy oceanfront apartment in a quiet Stavanger neighborhood, drinking Norwegian beer and smoking hash. Disgusting stuff, if you ask me. I'm more of a purist when it comes to weed, but the warm welcome and flowing drinks made me feel at ease, content in a way I hadn't been in a while. The next day, Harold drove me an hour south of Stavanger to his farmhouse in a community called Jæren, or at least that's what I think it was called. Norwegian names and addresses are a puzzle if you're not used to them. His property was vast and breathtaking, with rolling fields stretching toward the horizon. There was a lighthouse on the land that drew tourists from across Europe, though I never quite understood how the property lines worked. The farmhouse itself was small, perched atop a hill with a barn nearby. Harold lived alone in the two-story house, but he mentioned a tenant lived in the basement. As soon as I glanced at the basement window, a wave of dread washed over me. A webcam was pointed at the driveway, and the rest of the window was blocked by stacks of boxes and papers. It felt off, but Harold didn't seem bothered, so I brushed it aside, assuming the tenant was just eccentric or that such precautions were normal in a remote area where neighbors were separated by wide fields. I focused instead on the joy of being in Norway, pushing the unease to the back of my mind. Once settled in one of the upstairs bedrooms, I learned that Harold's son's wedding was happening that week, and the house would soon be filled with the bride's family from Bergen, or so I gathered. Meeting them was pleasant, their laughter and chatter filling the house with life. But on my second night, when everyone else had gone to bed, Harold and I stayed up late, chatting and drinking beer. That's when I met the tenant, Olaf. Harold had been struggling with his new smartphone, and apparently Olaf, who was tech-savvy, had bought the phone for him. Harold suggested we go downstairs to Olaf's basement for help. As we descended the creaky stairs, Harold grumbled about Olaf, saying he didn't like him and was frustrated by how he kept the newly remodeled basement. From his tone, I sensed their relationship was more complicated than just landlord and tenant, though he didn't elaborate. The basement was dark and oppressive, every window covered with makeshift barriers and piles of junk, old electronics, cables, and random clutter sprawled across the floor. Olaf's bedroom was a chaotic mess of computer. He invited us to sit, flicking on a desk lamp that cast harsh shadows across the room. That's when I got a good look at him. Olaf was in his mid-40s but looked older, with a shaved head, gaunt frame, prominent nose, and deep, dark circles under his eyes. He had the hollow, jittery look of a meth addict, a face I recognized from my time working at a recovery house in British Columbia. His movements were erratic, his speech clipped and stuttering, only confirming my suspicions. My gut screamed that this guy was trouble, and I resolved to keep my guard up. Olaf fixed Harold's phone quickly, his fingers dancing over the screen with practiced ease. Then he turned his attention to me, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Want to see some porn?" he asked, his tone casual but unsettling. I declined firmly, my skin crawling. Harold, drunk and oblivious, laughed and asked if Olaf had any gay porn. Olaf's response sent chills down my spine. "I don't care about the sexuality," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "I just like seeing people getting things introduced in them." The words hung in the air, heavy with an ominous undertone. Was he talking about sex, or something darker? I didn't want to find out. Exhausted and thoroughly creeped out, I pushed for us to leave. Harold, swaying slightly, agreed, and we climbed back upstairs. As we left the basement, I asked Harold if he trusted Olaf. He scoffed. "He's not my friend. He's just an addict renting the basement. The government pays his rent, and a nurse comes twice a week with his meds." With that bombshell, he said goodnight and stumbled to his room. I tried to put Olaf out of my mind, but his presence lingered like a dark cloud. Over the next few days, he kept popping into the house unannounced, especially during the wedding preparations. The first time, he handed me a flash drive with movies he'd illegally downloaded, emphasizing the illegal part with a smirk. The second time, he seemed high, his eyes glassy and movements unsteady. He told me I could ask him for anything, but not to tell Harold he'd been upstairs, then walked out slowly, as if afraid he'd collapse if he moved too fast. Each encounter left me more uneasy, my sense of safety eroding. After the wedding, when the house emptied out, leaving just Harold and me, Olaf's visits grew stranger and more frequent. One morning, as I was fixing breakfast in the kitchen, I turned to find him standing in the doorway, blood dripping from his nose, staring at me with cloudy, unfocused eyes. I jumped, dropping my plate, the crash echoing in the quiet house. He didn't react, just babbled incoherently, his gaze fixed somewhere above my head. I froze, my heart pounding, trying to calculate how to respond without provoking him. Before I could act, he turned and shuffled out, leaving me shaken. From that day on, I locked the door whenever I was alone in the house. When I told Harold about Olaf's behavior, he got visibly angry and stormed downstairs to confront him. He explained that he'd tried to evict Olaf multiple times, but the government always ruled against it, largely because Harold's sister, who felt sorry for Olaf because he shared her father's name, advocated for him. Harold resented having to live with him, especially since Olaf was supposed to be clean and in treatment. After that confrontation, Olaf's demeanor toward me shifted. He stopped being friendly and became a cold, invasive presence, his glares filled with unspoken hostility. One day, while I was in the bar and chatted with a couple of Harold's friends, Olaf barged in, carrying a laptop and a homemade-looking gadget. He sat by the window and, unprompted, announced he was using it to hack into people's Wi-Fi networks to steal passwords, like everyone does. He shot me a nasty look before storming out. I turned to Harold's friends, my voice trembling, and admitted I was terrified of him, convinced he'd attack me one day. They reassured me it wouldn't happen, but gave me their numbers, promising to pick me up if I ever felt in danger. We hugged and they left, but their words did little to ease my growing fear. Things between Harold and me soured soon after. I'd expressed my desire to leave for Germany to visit the man who's now my husband, and Harold, who I hadn't realized had hoped for a closer relationship, took it poorly. I also learned he had a severe drinking problem, getting blackout drunk daily, which I found deeply unattractive. The combination of Harold's alcoholism, Olaf's menacing presence, and my own exhaustion made the situation unbearable. I'd done my work on the farm, kept my end of the bargain, and just wanted to relax somewhere safe. The night I decided to book my flight to Germany, Harold went out to get drunk and didn't return until morning. I stayed up, hoping to talk to him, but must have dozed off. I woke to the sound of the front door closing and caught a glimpse of Harold through the living room window, heading to the barn with a dog and a six-pack of beers. I tried to message him on Facebook, but the internet was down. Strange. since it had been reliable the entire time I'd been there. I restarted the router a few times to no avail, wondering if Harold had cut the connection in a drunken fit of pettiness. Deciding to let it go, I figured I'd have breakfast and give him time to cool off before confronting him at the barn. I went downstairs to the bathroom, stripped down, and stepped into the shower, ready to refresh myself and sing a few songs to lift my spirits for the tough conversation ahead. The warm water felt good, and I started humming, trying to shake off the tension. Halfway through my first song, a loud bang jolted me. The front door, followed by someone screaming my name. I assumed it was Harold, drunk and angry. Sighing, I turned off the shower, bracing for an argument. But then the bathroom door slammed open, and to my horror, Olaf stood there, his face twisted with deranged expression, wielding a large box cutter, the kind used in warehouses. The blade gleamed under the bathroom light. Its metallic click as he flicked it open and shut sending my heart into my throat. For a moment, I couldn't think, couldn't move, my eyes locked on the knife. I was naked, wet, and cornered in a tiny bathroom in the middle of nowhere, with no one to hear me scream. The fear was paralyzing, my worst nightmare unfolding in real time. Olaf's scream snapped me back to reality. He was ranting, accusing me of playing with Harold's feelings, calling me a liar, a filthy Mexican, and threatening to cut me open and mess me up if I tried to take anything from Harold. His words were a jumbled mess, but one accusation lit a spark in me. He called me a thief. I could handle being insulted, but a thief? No way. Anger surged through my fear, and my training from the recovery house kicked in. I remembered the rules for dealing with volatile addicts. Make eye contact, keep your hands down, speak calmly but firmly, and always use their name. Staring into his wild, cloudy eyes, I said, "Olaf, you're the thief. You're the one stealing Harold's silverware. Olaf, you're the one breaking into his house. Olaf, Harold's not your friend. Olaf, Harold doesn't even want you here." It was a gamble, but it worked. My words threw him off, confusion flickering across his face. I took a small step forward, and he stepped back. He lunged again, waving the knife toward my chest and neck, his rants growing louder. I could feel cold sweat dripping down my back, a burning knot in my stomach. But I didn't flinch. I repeated the same accusations, each time gaining a step, slowly pushing him out of the bathroom. He might have realized what I was doing, but it was too late. As he took his final step past the doorframe, I moved as fast as my trembling body allowed, slammed the door shut on his crooked nose, and locked it with a click. I pressed my full weight against the door as Olaf unleashed a storm of curses, punches, and kicks. The wood shook under his assault, and I prayed, to a God I don't believe in, that it would hold. There was nothing in the bathroom to defend myself with, nothing to stop a high, knife-wielding psychopath if he broke through. After what felt like forever, I heard one final, bone-rattling kick, followed by the front door slamming as he stormed out. I stayed put for another 20 minutes, too scared to move, my breath shallow, my body braced against the door. When my senses finally returned, I knew I had to act fast. I cracked the bathroom door, peeked out, then bolted upstairs to throw on clothes. Knowing Olaf's webcam watched the driveway, I climbed out a window into the garden, jumped a fence, and ran around the house to the barn. I pounded on the door, screaming for Harold, but he didn't answer, probably passed out drunk. Desperate, I sprinted to the next house, where Harold's sister lived, and rang the bell. When she opened the door, I tried to explain, my words tumbling out in a mix of English and frantic gestures, since she spoke no English. After 10 minutes of comical confusion, her face shifted to mirror my terror. She marched me back to the barn, ordered Harold to guard me, and stormed to the basement to confront Olaf. I was shaking, still trying to explain to a sobering Harold what had happened. He listened, his drunken haze fading, then joined his sister in the basement. I could hear their shouts as they dragged Olaf out. His sister and her husband bundled him into a car and drove off, leaving Harold with me. I spent the day drinking beer, trying to numb the fear, but I couldn't get drunk. I just wanted to forget, but the memory of Olaf's knife, his deranged eyes, stayed sharp. Harold told me Olaf admitted to wanting to make me fight him, an excuse to stab me, confirming his sick fascination with introducing things to people. That night, I slept fully dressed, clutching tools for defense, while Harold kept watch. It was a restless, horrible night, every creak making me jump. The next morning, we went to the police. The officers seemed baffled that such a thing could happen in their quiet, picture-perfect community, but they took my statement seriously. One cop asked if I had somewhere safe to go while they dealt with Olaf. I told them I was planning to fly to Germany the next day. That last day in Norway, I barely spoke to Harold. I didn't blame him, but he admitted that, in his drunken state, he'd told Olaf I was leaving, upsetting him. Olaf, high on drugs all night, had cut the internet, waited for me to shower, and attacked, thinking he was defending Harold. I left Norway without a word, without looking back. The police said I could testify via Skype if there was a trial, so they took my contact info and promised justice. Over a year later, I heard from Harold that the case was dropped for lack of evidence. Olaf was back in the basement, doing whatever he does. The news hit me hard. I was angry for a while, but eventually, even anger fades when there's nothing left to fuel it. I try to focus on the good things, treating each day as a gift, but the shadow of that fear never fully left. I still look over my shoulder, study people for signs of danger, and feel a pang of dread when I shower, especially at the gym where I'm vulnerable. I can't shake the thought that if I'd done something differently, or if Olaf hadn't been so high as to be thrown off by my words, I have ended up a lifeless body in that bathroom, unnoticed for hours. Olaf is free, and I pray I never cross paths with him again. This happened just last night, and I'm still shaken up as I try to piece it together. I work evenings as a dispatcher in a medium-sized city in the Midwest, and I was driving home at 2 a.m. when I decided to stop for gas. Looking back, it was a dumb move. The gas station was poorly lit, its fluorescent lights flickering weakly against the dark, and the lot was completely empty. No other customers, no signs of life. I knew the rough parts of town, and this area wasn't usually one of them, so I figured it was safe enough. Still, the cold night air and the fresh rain made the place feel desolate, the pavement slick and reflecting the neon glow of the station sign. As I pumped gas, the nozzle hissing steadily, I noticed a middle-aged black woman sitting on the curb across the parking lot. She was drenched, her thin clothes clinging to her skin, clearly not suited for the chilly, wet weather. She looked vulnerable, and when she caught me watching her, she called out, her voice carrying across the empty lot. That was my second mistake of the night, deciding to engage. My job revolved around helping people, and something about her seemed genuine. So I walked over, my sneakers splashing through shallow puddles, to see if I could offer any help. "Hi, beautiful," she said, her tone soft but tinged with desperation. "I'm just trying to get home, but no one will help me. I'm trying to get to City A, but the cab ride's $60, and I only have 40. Can you help?" I don't usually give money to panhandlers. It's a habit from years of city living, but the rain, her soaked clothes, and her pleading eyes got to me. I told her I didn't have any cash on me, but if she'd come inside the station, I'd hit the ATM and give her a few bucks. We walked in together, the bell above the door jingling, and I headed to the ATM in the corner. My heart sank when I saw the out-of-service sign flashing on the screen. I apologized, explaining there was nothing more I could do, and turned to leave, expecting her to stay behind. But she didn't. She followed me back outside, chatting idly as I walked to my car, her voice a constant hum in the quiet night. I reached my driver's side door, ready to climb in, when she suddenly slipped into the passenger seat and buckled herself in. I froze, my hand on the door handle, staring at her in shock. Her demeanor shifted instantly, the softness gone, replaced by a sharp edge. "Just take me to my aunt's house," she said, her voice flat. she can give me some money. Alarm bells screamed in my head. My first instinct was to tell her to get the hell out of my car, but my gut warned me that could be dangerous. She'd already proven unpredictable, and her erratic behavior suggested she might be high. I had no idea if she was carrying a weapon, and forcing her out felt like it could provoke something violent. I slid into the driver's seat, my mind racing, and tried to stay calm. "Where are you asking me to take you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just start driving, and I'll tell you where to turn," she replied, her eyes fixed on the dashboard. I shook my head. "No. If you want me to consider driving you somewhere, I need to know where I'm going." I had no intention of actually driving her anywhere, but I needed to buy time. "Don't worry, honey," she said, her tone mock soothing. "I'm not one of the bad blacks. I'm not going to rob you or nothing. Just drive." I held my ground. "What's your aunt's address?" She started to fidget, her fingers tapping restlessly on her knee. "It's on Street A," she said vaguely. "What's the house number?" I pressed, keeping my voice firm. The questions were making her agitated, her movements jerky, her eyes darting around the car. We were still in the gas station parking lot. The engine off, the rain pattering softly on the windshield. I thought about running inside for help, but she'd been friendly with one of the attendants when we tried the ATM, and I wasn't about to leave her alone in my car. Finally, she snapped, "Why are you asking me so many questions? I thought we were friends. You don't trust me? Is it 'cause I'm black?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "I work at a police department," I said. "It's my job to ask these kind of questions." That was a mistake. She lost it, screaming about me being a snitch, accusing me of trying to get her in trouble, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. My fear spiked. She was unhinged, and I just wanted her gone. But my instincts told me demanding she leave wouldn't work. I needed a plan. "I'm not a police officer," I clarified, forcing a calm tone. "I just work at the police department. Look, why don't I take you to the Walmart? We can see if their ATMs are working." My goal was to get her out of the car peacefully and lose her in the store. To my relief, she liked the idea, her anger fading as quickly as it had flared. She nodded, settling back in the seat. Driving with her in my car was a calculated risk, and every second felt like a tightrope walk. As we headed to Walmart, she kept talking, her thoughts bouncing erratically from one topic to another, her sentences trailing off half-formed. It was hard to follow, but I caught enough to know she was lying through her teeth. "I'm glad we're friends now," she said at one point, her voice slurring slightly. "I got like 5 or 6 people trying to get me. I'm going to come to your work tomorrow so we can arrest them together. Okay?" I nodded vaguely, focusing on the road. "We can talk about that tomorrow. Tonight, you said you're trying to get home, right?" "Yeah. Honey, I'm trying to get to City B," she said. I frowned. "I thought you said City A." She backtracked quickly. Yeah, City A, that's what I meant. That's why the cab ride's $40. It's pretty far." I seized on the inconsistency. "You said you have $40, right?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I do, baby, I got 40, but the cab ride's $60. The math didn't add up, and her story kept shifting. "You sure you can't take me to my aunt's house?" she pressed. "She lives close by on Street B." I raised an eyebrow. "I thought you said Street A." She waved it off, annoyed. "No, baby, I meant Street B. But it don't matter, 'cause you won't give me money anyway. You sure you can't just take me to City A?" Her contradictions piled up, each one making my skin crawl. She was full of it, and the lies only heightened my unease. When we pulled into the Walmart parking lot, I got out first, hoping she'd follow. She did, trailing me into the brightly lit store, the fluorescent lights a stark contrast to the dark lot outside. I told her I needed to use a restroom before we looked for an ATM, planning to call the police from inside a stall. But she followed me into the bathroom, her presence suffocating. As I headed for a stall, she grabbed the crook of my arm and leaned in close, her breath hot against my ear. "If you don't got no money to give me, that's okay," she whispered, her voice low and suggestive. "But let me ask you something, sweetie. Do you like getting your pussy ate?" My stomach churned, and I yanked my arm free, my voice sharp. "No!" I bolted into a stall and locked the door, my hand shaking as I fumbled with the latch. Safe behind the barrier, I tried to reason with her. "You know, I have friends at the police department who can probably help you better than I can. I'm just going to call them, and we can figure this out together." The mention of cops set her off again. She screamed, her voice echoing off the tiles, accusing me of betraying her, of trying to get her arrested. I kept repeating that the police would help, hoping to calm her down. Finally, she snapped, "I'm leaving," and stormed out of the bathroom. I waited, holding my breath, counting to 60 to make sure she was gone. But less than a minute later, she was back, banging on the stall door. "Hey, come back to your car with me," she said, her voice eerily calm. I left my beer in her car. I knew she was lying. I'd seen her get into my car with nothing but the clothes on her back. No bag, no bottle, nothing. "No," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. "You didn't have anything with you." She didn't respond, and after a moment, I heard her footsteps retreat. I waited 5 full minutes, my heart pounding, before creeping out of the bathroom, scanning the aisles for any sign of her. She was gone. I found a manager near the front of the store, a tired-looking man in a blue vest, and explained what happened, my voice shaky but urgent. He called the police for me, and I was grateful to be in a different jurisdiction from the one I work in. I'd have died of embarrassment if my co-workers had shown up. The responding officer was professional, taking my statement as I recounted the night's events, my hands still trembling. He listened carefully, then advised me to be more careful in the future. "Some panhandlers turned violent," he said. "We had a report recently of a woman matching your description, assaulting a Good Samaritan who stopped to help." The words hit hard, a reminder how close I'd come to something worse. I drove home, the adrenaline fading into a bone-deep exhaustion. I'd been stupid, engaging with her, letting her into my car, underestimating the danger. My mother always warned me about stranger danger, and I'd brushed it off, thinking my job made me savvy enough to handle anything. I was lucky to walk away unscathed. Lucky my mistakes didn't cost me more. As I locked my door and sank into bed, the woman's shifting stories, her sudden rage, and that final, chilling whisper in the bathroom replayed in my mind. I learned my lesson, but the fear from that night still lingers, a sharp reminder to trust my instincts and stay sharp in a world full of unpredictable strangers. My mother fell in love with the house the moment she saw it, but the second I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. I'm not particularly sensitive to such things, but the place had an ominous weight, like the air itself was pressing down on me. On paper, it was perfect. Only a few decades old, custom-built, sitting on 2 acres of land in a safe neighborhood, with 5 spacious bedrooms. There was no reason for it to feel haunted, no dark history I ever uncovered. But in the 10 years we lived there, it never warmed to us or anyone else. Whatever was in that house didn't like strangers, and it made that clear from the very first night. I was about 9 when we moved in, and that first night, I couldn't sleep. The move, the new surroundings, the unfamiliar creaks of the house. It all kept me on edge. My parents insisted I'd adjust soon, that my unease was just my imagination grappling with the house's quirks. I wanted to believe them, but then I heard the tapping. I was on the verge of dozing off when a sharp, insistent sound jolted me awake. It came from my bedroom door, which opened into the hallway, and was left ajar for reasons I can't recall. The head of my bed was against the same wall as the door, so I couldn't see what was making the noise, but I could hear it clearly, just a few feet away. It was like someone tapping with a single finger, low on the door, deliberate and rhythmic. It would stop for a long pause, just long enough to make me think it was over, then start again, each tap piercing the silence. I don't know how long it went on. Time felt warped under the weight of my fear. Like any scared kid, I pulled the covers over my head, told myself it was a door hinges, even though I knew it wasn't, and eventually passed out from exhaustion. The tapping wasn't a constant occurrence, and over time, I learned to ignore it. When I mentioned it to my parents, they suggested it might be the hinges or the cat scratching at the door, explanations that didn't hold up but gave me something to cling to. But then one night, my younger brother started screaming and sobbing from the room he shared with our other brother, right next to mine. My parents rushed in, their footsteps heavy on the wooden floor, and asked what was wrong. Through tears, he choked out that he didn't like the crawling girl because she wouldn't stay in the closet anymore. My parents chalked it up to a nightmare, but we started calling her the crawler. I never got a good look at her myself, though I often caught fleeting movements out of the corner of my eye, shadows the size of a large dog darting past doorways or skittering around corners. At the time, I dismissed them as tricks of the light, but after we moved out, I realized most people don't see such things so often. The crawler, though, had a particular fondness of my brothers, especially Eddie. Years later, in a new house, I teased Eddie about the crawler, calling her an imaginary friend we used to have. His face went pale, and after some prodding, he shared a story that chilled me. One night in high school, Eddie was home alone, watching TV in the living room. Our dad was working late, and my other brother and I were at a play rehearsal. Eddie, a football player with dreams of joining the army, was built like a tank and had the bravado to match. When the power cut out, he quickly realized it was a street-wide outage and headed to the unfinished basement to check the circuit breaker. The basement was a sprawling, cluttered space we used only for storage, filled with old furniture, boxes, and luggage, its corners shrouded in shadow. As he fumbled with the fuse box, trying to recall what Dad had taught him, he heard something moving at the far end of the room. Thinking it was one of the cats, he called out absently and kept working. But the sounds grew louder, more deliberate, and he realized the dog was outside in the yard. His macho instincts kicked in, and he grabbed a golf club, shining his phone's flashlight toward the noise, expecting a raccoon or some other critter. That's when he saw her. He described her as an impossibly pale woman crawling toward him, but not on her hands and knees. Her legs were bent at unnatural angles, her body low to ground, moving with a jerky, purposeful speed. He couldn't tell if she was naked or wearing a pale gown, her mousy brown hair stringy and wild. Her face was slack yet manic, like she was driven by some unspoken intent. Eddie, in a panic, threw his phone at her instead of the golf club, a genius move in hindsight, and bolted upstairs, out the front door, and to the end of the driveway, where he sat shaken until someone came home. I remember that night vividly. We pulled up to find Eddie, usually so tough, looking like he'd seen death itself. He was beside himself, stammering out what happened. Mom asked why he hadn't called the cops, if he thought someone was in the house. He admitted he didn't want to go back for his phone. Why not use the neighbor's phone? Well, Eddie's not exactly known for common sense. With our German shepherd by our side and a phone ready to dial 911, we searched the house top to bottom. The lights were back on, but we found no one. Mom retrieved Eddie's cracked phone from the basement, and we didn't talk about it after that, all silently agreeing on an explanation none of us wanted to voice. Years later, when I brought it up, I teased Eddie that he'd watched The Ring or The Grudge one too many times. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "She wasn't like that." When I pressed him to explain, he shut down, refusing to say more. To this day, he won't talk about it. Living in that house taught us to rationalize the weirdness. My parents, both skeptics with STEM degrees, refused to admit it was haunted. My brothers and I avoided discussing it. Sensing that talking might stir things up, the activity wasn't constant enough to disrupt daily life. But it was persistent. Maids never lasted more than a few weeks before quitting, their faces pale as they muttered vague excuses. Friends refused to sleep over, claiming the house was too creepy. Objects went missing, only to turn up in bizarre places. A hairbrush in the attic, a shoe in the garage, doors slammed hard enough to rattle their frames. Even when no one was nearby, we shrugged it off, calling it just a house. But it wore on us. There was another phenomenon everyone experienced. Even my dad, who scoffed at ghost stories. I call it mistaken identity, for lack of a better term. You'd be alone in a room, and from the other end of the house, you'd hear a muffled conversation, like a crowd murmuring at a formal party, as my mom described it. To me, it sounded like a TV heard through a wall. In the moment, your brain would pin it on a family member, even if you knew they weren't home. It wasn't just a fleeting thought. You'd almost respond before catching yourself. Sometimes it was more specific, a laugh, a call of your name. I'd nearly answer back, only to realize no one was there. My brothers said they never heard their names, but they sometimes heard mine. If the crawler loved Eddie, these voices seemed to fixate on me. One night, the voices got too real. I woke from a deep sleep to the sound of someone rummaging in my room. It wasn't unusual to find my desk items toppled or shifted in the morning, but this was the first time I'd woken to the noise. In the darkness, I saw a vague figure moving around, more a silhouette than a person. My eyesight's poor without glasses, so I assumed it was my brother Austin. Annoyed, I snapped, "What are you doing in my room? Knock it off and let me sleep." I threw in some choice older sister insults for good measure. The figure paused, looked over its shoulder, and said, "Oh, sorry. I'll leave you alone now." It was a young man's voice, clear and real. I was awake, propped up on my elbow, no question about it. The figure walked into my bathroom, and only then did I realize I hadn't seen a face. My vision's not that bad, especially not when it passed so close. I bolted out of bed, flipped on every light, and searched the room. No one was there. What makes this stranger is that my dad stormed into my room moments later, having heard the rummaging and me talking to someone. He'd also assumed it was Austin, for no clear reason. But both my brothers were asleep in their beds. After that night, the rummaging and nightly calls stopped. Oddly, that bathroom had once been part of a Jack and Jill setup, connecting my room to my brother's before a remodel. Before that, my brothers complained that Dad would wander through at night, entering from the bathroom and leaving through their room, like he was on patrol. It never scared them, just seemed odd. Dad never did patrols, though. The no-face figure wasn't a one-off. Relatives and friends staying over often reported seeing a shadowy figure in their doorway at night. It never frightened them, and most wrote it off as a trick of the light, but they all described it the same, a shadow with no face. Sometimes, a faint whistling accompanied it, always at night, breathy and off-key, like someone amusing themselves but not quite nailing the tune. My dad insisted it was the air vents, launching a crusade to fix them, swapping covers and filters obsessively. It never stopped, and he never found an explanation, which drove him nuts. One evening, while babysitting my 3-year-old cousin in the living room, I got a glimpse of what he saw. I was playing on my Game Boy Advance, half watching as he stacked blocks on the rug. He kept glancing at the hallway doorway, not casually but with purpose, like something was catching his eye. Finally, I asked, "What are you looking at, Squirt?" His answer was chilling. "He still watches you sleep." I froze, trying to play it cool. "Oh, does he?" I said, my voice light. "Yeah," he continued. "He says he's going to miss you when you're gone. He won't tell me what's wrong with his face." My skin prickled. "Why? What's wrong with his face?" I asked. My cousin mushed his hands over his face, smearing them around, then added, "That's why he whistles sometimes." I called for my mom, my heart racing. Kids say creepy things, but this felt too specific, too real. There was something else in the house, something worse than the crawler or the whistler, and I'm almost certain it was separate. The house had a baseline creepiness we grew used to, even took a strange pride in, like owning an ugly pet. But sometimes it would gear up, and you'd know you were in for a rough time. It could happen day or night, with the house full or empty, with no clear trigger. It hated visitors most of all, as it resented us for bringing them in. When it geared up, everything changed. Sounds became muffled, like the air was thicker, swallowing voices and footsteps. Shadows grew dense, as if the light couldn't cut through them. The pets, our cats and dog, would freeze, their ears pricked, sensing something we couldn't. It was like the house was holding its breath, waiting for a predator to pass. It sounds dramatic, but no movie could capture the sudden, oppressive shift in atmosphere. The first time I encountered it, I was 12, sleeping on a sofa in my parents' home office because my grandparents were using my bedroom. I just turned off the lights when the air changed, a heavy dread settling over me. I knew something was watching me, a certainty I couldn't shake despite all the house's quirks. Unable to sleep, I decided to sneak into my parents' room and sleep on their floor. Opening my eyes meant facing a large antique mirror on the wall, and that's when I saw him. He stood in the mirror like it was a window, blocking the reflection of the room. At the time, I didn't know what a decaying corpse looked like, but now I do. He was an adult male, maybe late 30s, though his condition made it hard to tell. His nose was thin, his eyes closed set, and he wore tattered work overalls. As ruined as the rest of him, burns marred his visible skin, the right arm's flesh so tight it split, revealing yellow tissue beneath. His body looked bloated, his lips peeled back to show dark gums and rotting teeth. Whether it was a grin or the decay, he was staring right at me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, trapped in his gaze for what felt like forever, but was probably a minute. Then I screamed, a raw, terrified wail, and ran, refusing to set foot in the office again. But he wasn't confined to that mirror. At a holiday party, a guest wandered off to find a bathroom and came back hysterical, insisting she'd seen a man peering at her from behind a bookshelf. She swore he looked dead, but the shelf was flush against the wall. Nothing could have been there. The other guests dismissed her as drunk, but she never stopped bringing it up when she saw my mom, calling him the ghost. That incident seemed to break some truce with the house. Things escalated. A large picture in my room lifted off the wall, somehow avoiding the toys on the shelf below, and launched 10 feet across the room, crashing with a force that made me jump. I walked out, too stunned to react. The house grew more oppressive, its atmosphere heavy with tension. We were all on edge, depressed, barely sleeping. Footsteps echoed up and down the long hallway at night, slow and deliberate on the wooden floor. A putrid, rotting smell would appear in random spots, lingering with no source. Appliances turned on and off by themselves, lights flickered, and no electrician could find a fault in the wiring despite multiple visits. My parents cited this as the reason we moved, worried about a fire hazard. I have another theory. Years later, after a few glasses of wine, my mom told me a story that confirmed my suspicions. About 3 months before we moved, she and Dad had a fight. He stayed up watching TV in the den, falling asleep on the sofa while she went to bed. A few hours later, she woke to the feeling of someone climbing into bed with her. Assuming it was Dad, she opened her eyes and found the dead man's face inches from hers, his decayed features so close their noses nearly touched. She felt freezing cold, smothered by a putrid stench, unable to breathe or move, as if pinned by an invisible weight. His eyes bored into hers, unblinking, as she clutched the sheets and prayed, her throat tightening. Then, just as suddenly, he vanished, no fading, no warning, just gone. She might have called it sleep paralysis, but 2 days later, when I was home from college, I saw her face. Scratches and welts marked her skin, her eyes bloodshot with burst vessels, bruises lining one side of her neck in a deliberate pattern. A cashier at a grocery store quietly asked if she needed help, assuming abuse. Mom made up a story about falling while hiking, but it didn't add up. She and Dad started sleeping in my room, claiming they liked my mattress better. We moved soon after, and once we were out, we realized how suffocating that house had been. An older couple bought it, gutting and renovating it until it was unrecognizable. I don't know if they ever experienced anything, But I hope not. The activity didn't follow us, but I still get nervous looking in mirrors at night, half expecting to see that bloated, burned face staring back. The dead man, whatever he was, felt like the heart of the house's malice, and if anything could have followed us, I fear it would have been him. The gentle sway of the cruise ship should have been soothing, a rhythmic lullaby of the sea. But as I stood at the railing, staring out at the endless expanse of ocean, a chill ran down my spine, sharp and unsettling. He was there again, third deck, port side, half in behind a lifeboat. The same man I'd seen a dozen times over the past 3 days, always watching, always vanishing the moment I tried to approach. A phantom passenger on a ship carrying thousands. He was a shadow that refused to fade. It had started innocently enough. This was my first cruise, a much-needed escape after a brutal year at work that had left me drained and hollow. The moment I stepped up the gangway, the weight of deadlines and office politics began to melt away, replaced by the thrill of adventure. The first 2 days were a whirlwind of indulgence. Tropical cocktails sipped by the pool, lounging in the sun with a novel I'd been too busy to read, and getting to know my fellow passengers. I struck up a friendship with an elderly couple from Florida. Their warm laughter balmed my frazzled nerves. I shared a few jokes with the bartenders, their easy banter making me feel like a regular. I even let myself be dragged into a conga line during the Salaway party, my cheeks flushed with laughter and the buzz of a pina colada. It wasn't until the third day that I noticed him. I was leaning against a railing on the Lido deck, watching dolphins leap playfully in the ship's wake, their sleek bodies glinting in the sunlight. A flicker of movement caught my eye, and I turned to see a man, maybe in his 40s, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He was staring right at me, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch, making my skin crawl. I blinked, and he was gone, swallowed by the crowd or the ship's labyrinthine corridors. I shook it off, blaming too much sun and not enough water, but the unease lingered like a bad taste. Then I saw him again, at dinner, lurking just outside the dining room, his silhouette framed by the ornate doorway, and again during the midnight buffet, half hidden behind an elaborate ice sculpture of a swan, his eyes locked on me through the crowd. Each time, that same piercing stare. Each time, he vanished the moment I tried to get a closer look, leaving me questioning my own senses. By the fourth day, paranoia had taken root, its tendrils wrapping around my thoughts. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows, my heart racing at the sight of any man with glasses. I tried to distract myself with short excursions, wandering through vibrant markets, snapping photos of turquoise bays, but he was always there, hovering at the edges of my vision, a specter I couldn't shake. "You okay, hun?" my new friend Ethel asked as we played shuffleboard on the Lido deck, her voice warm with concern. Her silver hair glinted in the sun, and her eyes crinkled with a grandmotherly kindness. "You seem a bit jumpy." I forced a smile, gripping the shuffleboard stick a little too tightly. "Just too much coffee, I think." I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. How could I explain that I was being stalked by a man no one else seemed to notice? That I was starting to doubt my own sanity? That night, sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned in my narrow bunk, the gentle rocking of the ship amplifying my unease. The hum of the engines, once comforting, now felt like a pulse of danger. Around 2 a.m., I gave up and decided to get some air. The ship was eerily quiet as I made my way to the promenade deck, the usual bustle replaced by an almost sacred stillness. A few other insomniacs wandered about, their footsteps soft on the polished wood. But mostly, I had the place to myself. I leaned against the railing, letting the cool sea breeze wash over me, the salt air sharp in my lungs. The ocean stretched out endlessly, a vast, inky void under a sky dusted with stars. Beautiful night, isn't it? The voice behind me nearly stopped my heart. I spun around, my breath catching as I came face to face with my phantom stalker. Up close, he looked ordinary, unremarkable, even His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the faint light. He was the kind of man you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But those eyes, they seemed to look right through me, cold and calculating, stripping away any sense of safety. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. "Why are you following me?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, a thin, practiced curve of his lips. Now, don't be alarmed. I'm just here to keep an eye on things." "What things?" I demanded, my fear giving way to a spark of anger, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "I'm going to call security if you don't explain yourself right now." He chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "By all means, go ahead. I'm sure they'd be very interested to hear about the passenger who isn't on any manifest." The blood drained from my face, leaving me lightheaded. "What do you mean?" Exactly what I said. His voice was calm, almost mocking. "Go on, ask at the purser's desk. Show them my picture. I guarantee they won't find any record of me on this ship." My mind reeled, grasping for an anchor. Was this some kind of sick joke? A bizarre hazing ritual for first-time cruisers? Or was I losing my grip on reality? Hallucinating a stalker who didn't exist? "What do you want from me?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the soft lapping of waves against the hull. His expression softened slightly, a flicker of something almost human crossing his face. "Nothing sinister. I assure you, I'm here to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I snapped, my patience fraying. He glanced around, his eyes scanning the deck as if checking for eavesdroppers, though we were alone under the vast night sky. "Not here. Meet me in the library tomorrow at 10 a.m. Come alone. I'll explain everything then." Before I could respond, he melted into the shadows, his footsteps silent as he disappeared around a corner. I didn't sleep a wink that night, my mind racing with questions and fears. As soon as the sun rose, painting the sky in hues of peach and gold, I was at the purser's desk, my hand shaking as I described my mystery man to an increasingly bewildered staff member. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said after checking her computer for the third time, her brow furrowed. "We have no passenger matching that description on board. Are you sure you didn't just see a crew member?" I left the desk feeling more confused than ever, the staff member's polite concern only deepening my unease. Part of me wanted to skip the library meeting, to pretend this whole strange episode had never happened. But curiosity and a nagging sense that something bigger was at play won out. At precisely 10 a.m., I entered the ship's library, a cozy room lined with bookshelves and plush armchairs. It was deserted except for my phantom passenger, who sat in a high-backed chair near the window, looking for all the world like he owned the place. "Ah, good," he said as I approached, his voice smooth and measured. "I was worried you might not come." "Start talking," I said, crossing my arms and trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "Who are you, really?" He sighed, and for the first time he looked older and more tired, the lines on his face etched deeper in the morning light. "My name is David Reeves. I'm with, let's call it, a specialized branch of government security." I snorted, unable to help myself. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England." "I understand your skepticism," he said, unfazed. "But I assure you this is deadly serious. Your life may depend on believing me." Something in his tone made me pause, a cold weight settling in my stomach. "What do you mean?" David leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, his eyes locked on mine. "You were not supposed to be on this cruise, Ms. Jenkins. Your booking was a last-minute decision, correct?" I nodded slowly, a chill crawling up my spine. How did he know that? I'd only decided to book the cruise 2 weeks ago, a spur-of-the-moment escape from the grind of my job. "Yeah, so it was a fortuitous decision," he continued, his words precise. "You see, there are people on this ship who mean you harm, very dangerous people who believe you have something they want." My head spun, the room tilting slightly. That's impossible." I'm nobody, just a middle manager from Ohio. Why would anyone be after me? David's eyes bored into mine, unyielding, because of what you saw 6 months ago. The night of March 15th. You were working late, remember? The memory hit me like a physical blow, sharp and vivid. I'd been at the office, burning the midnight oil to finish a report. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of something strange. Men in dark suits dragging someone into a van, their movements quick and practiced. There was the unmistakable glint of a gun in one of their hands. Catching the streetlight, I'd frozen, my heart in my throat, convincing myself I'd imagine it. Too scared to report to anyone, I'd buried the memory, pretending it never happened. How do you know about that? I stammered, my voice shaking. Because we've been watching you ever since, David said, his tone matter-of-fact. Those men were part of a criminal organization we've been trying to bring down for years. They didn't realize you'd witnessed their operation, but recently, they'd become suspicious. I slumped back in the chair, my mind reeling. So what now? Am I in danger? David nodded grimly, his jaw tight. I'm afraid so, but that's why I'm here. To keep you safe until we can get you off this ship and into protective custody. Part of me wanted to laugh, to dismiss this as an elaborate prank or the plot of some low-budget thriller. But deep down, I knew he was telling the truth. It explained the nagging sense of unease I'd felt for months, the feeling of being watched even before this cruise. What do I need to do? I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. For now, act normal, David said, his tone firm but not unkind. Enjoy your cruise. I'll be nearby, keeping an eye on things. If there's any immediate danger, I'll contact you. Otherwise, meet me here again in 2 days. We'll go over the extraction plan then. As I stood to leave, a thought struck me. Wait, if you're some kind of secret agent, why reveal yourself to me at all? Why not just watch from the shadows? David smiled, and for the first time, there was a hint of warmth in his eyes, a flicker of humanity. Because everyone needs hope, Ms. Jenkins. The knowledge that someone is on your side can be a powerful thing. The next 2 days passed in a surreal haze. I went through the motions of enjoying my vacation. Sunbathing by the pool, watching cheesy lounge acts in the theater, making small talk with other passengers over dinner. But my mind was constantly racing, scanning every face for potential threats, every shadow for danger. I caught glimpses of David here and there, leaning against a railing, lingering near a bar, always watching, always vigilant. His presence, once unsettling, now brought a strange comfort, a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. When we met again in the library, David's expression was grim, his eyes shadowed with tension. There's been a complication, he said without preamble, his voice low. We've identified at least 3 hostiles on board. The extraction may have to happen sooner than planned. My heart raced, a cold sweat breaking out on my palms. How soon? Tonight, he said, his tone clipped, during the captain's gala. It's our best chance to get you off the ship unnoticed. As he outlined a plan, specific times, routes, and contingencies, I felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. This was really happening. In a matter of hours, I'd be leaving my old life behind, diving headfirst into a world of secrets and shadows. Are you ready for this? David asked as we prepared to part ways, his eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders, as ready as I'll ever be. He nodded, a flicker of approval in his gaze. Good. Remember, no matter what happens tonight, know that you're not alone. We got your back. As I walked back to my cabin to prepare for the evening ahead, I caught my reflection in a mirrored wall. The woman staring back at me looked different. Stronger, more determined, her eyes bright with a fire I hadn't seen in years. The phantom passenger had changed everything. My vacation had turned into a fight for survival. My mundane life transformed into a high-stakes thriller. And strangely enough, I felt more alive than I had in years. Whatever lay ahead, Danger, uncertainty, a new beginning. I was ready to face it. The beam of my flashlight trembled in my hand, cutting through the inky darkness of the forest and illuminating a tangle of gnarled tree roots and dense underbrush. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a deafening drum that seemed to echo in the eerie silence. 20 pairs of wide, frightened eyes stared back at me, the faces of my campers pale and expectant, waiting for answers I didn't have. But one pair of eyes was missing, little Tommy's. Somewhere in the vast, uncaring woods, a child's muffled cries echoed, growing fainter with each passing moment, tearing at my soul. It was supposed to be a simple night hike, a fun adventure to cap off the first week of summer camp at Camp Pinewood. I'd led dozens of these outings before, each one filled with laughter and the thrill of exploration, always ending with mores and ghost stories around the campfire. But as I stood there, surrounded by terrified children and swallowed by the oppressive darkness, I realized how quickly things could go wrong in the wilderness. The day had started like any other at camp. I woke to the cheerful blare of the morning bugle, the crisp mountain air filling my lungs as I stepped out of my cabin. The scent of pine and damp earth was invigorating, a reminder of why I loved this place. After a breakfast of slightly burnt pancakes and watery orange juice, I herded my group of 10-year-olds through the usual activities. We practiced archery, the kids giggling as their arrows veered wildly off target. We made lopsided crafts in the art cabin, glue and glitter clinging to their fingers. In the afternoon, we swam in the lake, the water cool and clear, the kids shrieking with delight as they splashed each other. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows across the camp, excitement buzzed through the air. Night hike night was always a favorite, a chance for the kids to feel daring and grown-up, their flashlights bobbing like fireflies in the dark. "All right, campers," I called out as we gathered by the trailhead, my voice bright with enthusiasm. "Remember the buddy system. Stay close and don't wander off. We'll be back in time for mores around the campfire." A chorus of eager, "Yes, Counselor Sarah," rang out, their voices high and excited. I did a quick head count. 20 kids, all accounted for, including Tommy, a quiet boy who'd been struggling with homesickness all week. His big, solemn eyes had tugged at my heart, and I'd made a mental note to keep an extra watch on him. With everyone ready, we set off down the well-worn path, the beam of my heavy-duty flashlight leading the way. The forest came alive around us, filled with the sounds of nocturnal creatures stirring, an owl hooting in the distance, the rustle of leaves, the soft chirps of crickets. The kids' nervous giggles filled the air, their flashlights dancing across the trees. "Did you know that owls can turn their heads almost all the way around?" I said, seizing the teachable moment as the owl's call echoed again. It helps them hunt for mice and other small animals in the dark. A few wows and cools rippled through the group, and I smiled, remember my own childhood wonder at the mysteries of nature. About 15 minutes into the hike, we reached Lookout Point, a small clearing that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below, now blanketed in moonlight. The stars glittered like diamonds in the clear night sky, and the distant lights of the town twinkled faintly. "Okay, everyone," I said, turning to face the group. "Take a moment to enjoy the view, but remember, no wandering off. Stay where I can see you." The kids spread out, oohing and awing at the starry sky, their voices a soft hum of excitement. I kept a watchful eye, my flashlight sweeping across the group periodically, counting heads to make sure everyone was accounted for. Everything seemed fine until it wasn't. "Counselor Sarah?" A small voice piped up, trembling with worry. It was Annie, Tommy's assigned buddy for the hike. "I can't find Tommy." My blood ran cold, a wave of dread washing over me. I swung my flashlight around, illuminating each worried face. One was missing. "Tommy!" I called out, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Tommy, were you?" Silence answered, heavy and oppressive. Everyone gather round, I said, forcing calm into my tone, though my heart was racing. We need to stick together. Has anyone seen where Tommy went? Head shakes and murmured, "No's," were the only response. Annie's eyes were wide with guilt. "He was right next to me," she said, her voice small. Then I turned to look at a weird-shaped tree, and when I looked back, he was gone. My mind raced. How long had he been missing? 5 minutes? 10? In the dense forest, a child could cover a lot of ground in that time, or become hopelessly lost in a matter of yards. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," I said, my counselor training kicking in. "We're going to call out for Tommy and listen very carefully. If you hear anything at all, let me know immediately." We spent the next few minutes calling his name, our voices echoing through the trees, sharp and desperate. "Tommy, Tommy, where are you?" The other campers were starting to get scared, huddling closer together, their flashlights trembling in their hands. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and their fear mirrored my own. Just as I was about to make the difficult decision to head back to camp for help, I heard it, a faint cry, barely audible over the nighttime sounds of forest. "Shoo!" I hissed, holding up a hand. "Listen!" There it was again, a child's voice calling out, coming from deep in the woods, off the main trail. Relief flooded through me, sharp and sweet. "I hear him," I said, my voice steadying. "He's this way. Everyone, stay close together and follow me." We moved carefully through the underbrush, my flashlight beam searching for any sign of Tommy. The cries were getting louder, but they sounded strange, muffled, as if something was stifling them. "Tommy!" I called out, my voice cutting through the night. "Keep making noise, buddy. We're coming to find you." Another cry, louder this time. We were getting close. Suddenly, my flashlight beam caught a flash of red. Tommy's t-shirt. He was about 20 yards ahead, standing with his back to us, a small, solitary figure in the vast darkness. "Tommy!" I exclaimed, rushing forward, relief surging through me. "Thank goodness. Are you okay?" As I got closer, I realized something was wrong. Tommy wasn't moving. He stood rigid, facing away from us, his posture unnaturally still. "Tommy?" I said more cautiously now, my steps slowing. "It's Counselor Sarah. Can you turn around?" Slowly. So slowly, Tommy began to turn. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a primal warning screaming in my mind. Something was very, very wrong. As Tommy fully faced us, a collective gasp rose in the group. His eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face. And his mouth was covered by a large, hairy hand, its fingers thick and unnaturally long. Time seemed to freeze. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing, my breath catching in my throat. Then, from behind Tommy, a massive shape rose up in the dim light of my flashlight. I caught glimpses of matted fur, powerful limbs, and eyes that glowed with an unnatural intelligence. A scream built in my throat, but I choked it back, my training battling with raw fear. The creature, whatever it was, still had Tommy. I couldn't risk startling it. "Everyone," I whispered, my voice shaking, "very slowly, start backing up toward the trail. No sudden movements." The campers, to their credit, obeyed instantly, their eyes never leaving the terrifying scene before us. They inched backward, their flashlights trembling, casting erratic beams across the trees. I stayed where I was, my mind racing. What was this thing? A bear? No. Bears didn't stand like that, didn't have hands like that. Some kind of primate? This far north? Impossible. Unless... The word rose unbidden in my mind, a legend I'd always dismissed as campfire stories and overactive imaginations. Bigfoot. I pushed the thought away. Right now, the nature of the creature didn't matter. All that mattered was getting Tommy away from it safely. "Hey there," I said softly, addressing the creature, my voice trembling but steady. "We don't mean you any harm. We just want our friend back. Please let him go." The creature made a low, rumbling sound, not quite a growl, not quite speech. Its grip on Tommy seemed to loosen slightly, and I took that as a sign to keep going. Encouraged, I took a slow step forward, my hands raised to show I was no threat. "That's it. You don't want to hurt anyone, do you? Just let Tommy come to me, and we'll leave you alone. I promise." For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The forest was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Then, miracle of miracles, the creature slowly removed its hand from Tommy's mouth. With a gentle push, it nudged the boy toward me. Tommy stumbled forward, his legs wobbly, and I scooped him into my arms, clutching him tightly. He was shaking like a leaf, his small body trembling against mine, but he was unhurt. "Run," I whispered to the group. "Back to the trail. Go." We took off through the woods, branches whipping at our faces as we ran, Tommy clinging to me. I could hear heavy footsteps behind us, crashing through the underbrush, but I didn't dare look back. We burst out onto the trail and kept running, our breaths ragged, not stopping until the warm, welcoming lights of the camp came into view. As we stumbled into the safety of Camp Pinewood, gasping for breath, I finally allowed myself to look back at the dark line of trees. There was no sign of pursuit, no glowing eyes watching from the shadows. Whatever that creature had been, it hadn't followed us out of its domain. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with lingering unease. The next few hours were a blur of chaos. Park rangers arriving with flashlights and radios, search parties organizing, concerned parent on the phone, their voices sharp with worry. I told my story a dozen times, each retelling feeling less real than the last. Most of the adults dismissed it as a bear encounter, our imaginations running wild in the darkness. "Probably just a black bear," one ranger said, scribbling in his notebook. "They can look pretty scary at night." But I knew what I had seen, and as I looked at Tommy, huddled in a blanket and sipping hot chocolate, his eyes still wide with the weight of what had happened, I saw the same knowledge reflected there. We had encountered something in those woods, something that defied explanation, something that didn't belong in the tidy categories of wildlife manuals. As the commotion died down and the campers were finally tucked into their beds, I found myself standing at the edge of camp, staring out at the dark forest. A part of me was tempted to grab a flashlight and go back out there, to seek answers to the questions swirling in my mind. What was that creature? Where had it come from? Was it still out there, watching us even now? But a larger part of me, the part that had stared into those intelligent, alien eyes, knew better. Some mysteries were better left unsolved. Some corners of the wilderness were not meant for us to explore. I turned back to the warmth and light of the camp, a changed person. The forest would keep its secrets, and I would keep mine. But I knew that every time I looked at the woods from now on, I would wonder what other wonders and terrors might be hiding just beyond the reach of our flashlight beams. For now, though, I had a camp to run and kids to comfort, and I had a story, one I'd carry with me forever, a tale of fear, courage, and the unknown that lurked in the heart of the wild. The beam of my flashlight trembled as it swept across the muddy ground, illuminating a set of tracks unlike anything I'd ever seen. Massive, five-toed prints sank deep into the earth, each one easily twice the size of my outstretched hand, their edges sharp and fresh in the damp soil. My breath caught in my throat, a cold knot of dread tightening in my chest as I followed their path with my eyes. They led straight to the remnants of the sheep pen, where splintered wood and scattered wood painted a scene of carnage. Whatever had made these tracks was responsible for the devastation before me, and it was still out there, somewhere in the darkness. I'd been a farmer all my life, just like my father and his father before him. Ridgeview Farm had been in our family for generations, its rolling hills and fertile soil providing a good, honest living for as long as anyone could remember. We'd faced our share of hardships over the years, droughts that turned the field to dust, floods that swallowed the crops, the occasional outbreak of disease among the livestock. But nothing could have prepared me for what began happening 3 weeks ago. It started small, almost unnoticeable. A chicken gone missing here. A few ears of corn found mangled in the field there. I chalked it up to foxes, or maybe some local kids playing pranks. Their boredom turning to mischief. But then things escalated, taking a darker turn. One morning, I woke to find 3 of my prized sheep dead in the pasture. Their bodies torn apart in a way no normal predator could manage. The wounds were too precise, too brutal. The surrounding ground marked with deep, unfamiliar tracks. The local wildlife officer was baffled, crouching over the carcasses with a furrowed brow. "Never seen anything like it," he muttered, his voice low. "Too big for a coyote, too vicious for a bear. You sure you didn't see any strange vehicles around? Could be some city folks' dogs got loose." But I knew better. No dog could have done this. And as the attacks continued, growing bolder and more frequent, a creeping dread settled over the farm, heavy and oppressive. My wife, Sarah, wanted to call in more help. Maybe even one of those cryptozoologist types she'd seen on late-night TV. Their wild theories filling her head. But I was stubborn, my pride rooted deep in the land. This was my farm, my responsibility. Whatever was out there, I'd deal with it myself, which is how I found myself standing in the cold night air, flashlight in one hand, my trusty old rifle in the other, staring at tracks that shouldn't exist. The moon hung full above, casting a pale, silver light across the fields, turning familiar shapes into looming, unfamiliar forms. A distant howl snapped me back to attention. It sounded unlike any animal call I'd ever heard, deep guttural, with an almost human-like quality that sent shivers racing down my spine. And it was close, too close. I raised my rifle, scanning the tree line at the edge of the pasture, my finger resting lightly on the trigger. The shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and for a moment, I felt like a child again, afraid of the dark and the unknown things lurking just out of sight. Another howl, closer this time, echoed through the night. My grip tightened, my breath shallow. "Come on," I whispered, as much to steady myself as to challenge the unseen creature. "Show yourself." As if in answer to my call, the bushes at the edge of the woods began to rustle, their branches swaying with deliberate movement. I held my breath, the beam of my flashlight fixed on the spot, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would give me away. Slowly, deliberately, something emerged from shadows. At first, all I could make out was a massive, dark shape, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, its outline blurring against the trees. As it stepped into the moonlight, details began to resolve, each one more impossible than the last. It was vaguely humanoid, standing upright on 2 powerful legs, but any resemblance to a person ended there. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur, ranging from dark brown to an almost reddish tint in places, tangled with bits of leaves and dirt. Massive arms hung at its sides, ending in hands tipped with wickedly curved claws that gleamed faintly in the light. And its face, God, its face, was a nightmarish blend of ape and wolf, with a protruding snout filled with gleaming, jagged teeth. But it was the eyes that stopped me cold. They glowed with an unnatural intelligence, watching me with knowing intensity that made my skin crawl. I stood frozen, my mind reeling as it tried to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew to be possible. This couldn't be real. Creatures like this didn't exist outside of campfire stories, grainy photographs, and badly photoshopped internet hoaxes. But there it was, standing not 30 yards away, regarding me with those eerie, piercing eyes. For a long moment, neither of us moved, the night holding its breath. Then, with deliberate slowness, the creature began to advance across the field toward me, its steps heavy and purposeful. My paralysis broke, and years of hunting instinct took over. I raised a rifle to my shoulder, sighting down the barrel, my hand steady despite the fear coursing through me. "Stop right there," I shouted, my voice cracking with strain. "Don't come any closer." The creature paused, cocking its head to one side as if considering my words. Then, to my utter astonishment, it spoke. No harm, it growled, the words guttural but unmistakable, rumbling from deep within its chest. Hungry. Help. The rifle nearly slipped from my grasp, my arms trembling as the world tilted beneath me. It could talk? This was beyond anything I could have imagined, shattering every assumption I'd ever held about the world. You can understand me? I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. The creature nodded, a surprisingly human gesture that sent another wave of disbelief through me. Understand. Learn. Watch long time. Its voice was rough, like gravel grinding together, but the words were clear, each one carefully formed. My mind raced, questions piling atop one another. How long had this thing been out there, watching us, learning our language? And more importantly, what did it want? Why are you killing my animals? I demanded, finding my voice again, the anger rising to meet my fear. Hungry, it repeated, its eyes never leaving mine. Forest food gone. Need help. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I began to notice details I'd missed before. The creature was thin, its ribs visible beneath the matted fur, its frame gaunt despite its massive size. There was an air of desperation about it, like a starving dog driven scavenge, its strength tempered by hunger. Slowly, I lowered my rifle, every instinct screaming at me to run, to shoot, to do something. But a deeper part of me, the part that had grown up on this land, that felt a connection to every living thing on it, held me in place. Were you? I asked, my voice barely audible, the question hanging heavy in the night air. The creature seemed to consider this for a moment, its head tilting slightly. Old, it finally said, its voice tinged with a weight I couldn't quite grasp. Very old, last of kind. A wave of sadness washed over me, unexpected and profound. Whatever this being was, it was alone, the last of its species, driven by hunger and desperation to risk exposure. I thought of the farm, of the generations who'd worked this land, of the loneliness that sometimes crept in during the long, quiet nights. Listen, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them, reckless and insane. I can't have you killing my livestock, but maybe we can work something out. If you help me around the farm, I can make sure you're fed. The creature's eyes widened, a flicker of hope crossing its strange, inhuman features. Help how? It asked, its voice cautious but curious. I thought quickly, my mind scrambling to make sense of the impossible situation. You're strong, right? There's always heavy lifting to be done. Fences to mend, equipment to move, hay bales to stack. And you could keep other predators away from the animals. No more coyotes or foxes sneaking into the pens. It was a wild plan, born of desperation and a strange, inexplicable empathy, but it felt right. For a long moment, the creature stood silent, its gaze steady as it considered my offer. Then, slowly it nodded, its shaggy head dipping in agreement. Agree! It rumbled, the word heavy with finality. Work for food. No more kill. Relief flooded through me, so intense it nearly buckled my knees. It was crazy, absolutely, undeniably insane. But somehow, I'd managed to negotiate a truce with a creature that shouldn't even exist. Okay, I said, lowering my rifle completely, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. Let's head back to the barn. I've got some leftover roast in the cooler there. We can figure out the details over a meal. As we walked across the moonlit field, this impossible being lumbering along beside me, I couldn't help but laugh, a low, disbelieving chuckle at the absurdity of it all. What would Sarah say when she saw this? How would I explain it to the neighbors, or keep it hidden from the curious eyes of the town? But as I glanced at my new employee, friend, I saw something in those inhuman eyes that struck a chord deep within me, gratitude, relief, and maybe, just maybe, the faintest glimmer of hope. We reached the barn, and I flicked on the lights, the harsh fluorescent glare flooding the space. The creature blinked, its eyes narrowing as it adjusted to the sudden brightness. In the stark light, It looked even more out of place. A being of myth and shadow thrust into mundane reality in my weathered old barn, surrounded by bales of hay and rusted tools. I rummaged in the cooler, pulling out a plastic container of roast beef left over from Sunday's dinner, the savory scent filling the air as I popped the lid. A thought struck me as I turned back to the creature, the container in my hands. "You know," I said, hesitating, "I can't just keep calling you it or creature. Do you have a name?" It made a series of low, rumbling sounds, a string of syllables that might have been its name in whatever language its kind once spoke. The sounds were guttural, alien, impossible for my tongue to replicate. That might be a bit tricky for me to pronounce," I said, scratching the back of my neck. "How about Buddy? At least until we come up with something better." The newly christened Buddy considered this for a moment, its head tilting as it tested the word. "Buddy," it repeated, its voice slow and deliberate. "Good name. Strong name." I couldn't help but smile, a genuine warmth spreading through me as I handed over a container of roast beef. Buddy took it with surprising delicacy, its massive claws careful not to crush the plastic. It dug in, eating with a restraint that belied its size, its eyes closing briefly in what looked like simple contentment. I leaned against a wooden post, my mind already racing with the challenges and possibilities that lay ahead. Life on Ridgeview Farm was about to get a whole lot more interesting. There would be problems to solve. How to keep Buddy hidden. How to explain the sudden absence of predator attacks. How to integrate this impossible being into the rhythms of the farm. There would be secrets to keep, stories to invent, and a whole new world of discovery waiting just outside my door. But as I watched Buddy eat, its massive frame relaxed for the first time since it had stepped into the moonlight, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. The farmer and the creature, two lonely souls finding unexpected companionship in a world full of mysteries. Ridgeview Farm had always been a place of resilience, of finding a way forward no matter the odds. And now it was something more, a sanctuary, not just for me and Sarah, but for a being who had nowhere else to go. The night stretched on, the barn a warm island of light in the vast darkness. And as I stood there, watching Buddy savor each bite, I knew that this was only the beginning of a story unlike any other, a tale of trust, survival, and the strange, beautiful connections that could grow in the unlikeliest of places. The gentle rocking of the cruise ship, which had once lulled me into a deep, restful sleep, now only sharpened the edges of my unease. I lay rigid in my narrow bunk, my body tense as a coiled spring, my eyes locked on the cabin door, silently willing it to stay closed. The scratching sounds that had haunted my nights had stopped, for now, but the memory of those deep, jagged claw marks gouged into corridor walls was seared into my mind, vivid and terrifying. Whatever had made them was still out there, prowling the ship in the dead of night, a silent predator in a floating city of unsuspecting vacationers. This was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, a 2-week Caribbean cruise, to celebrate my early retirement after 30 years of teaching high school English. I'd spent decades molding young minds, grading endless essays, and dreaming of the day I could trade chalk dust for sun, sand, and tropical drinks with little umbrellas. When I booked this cruise, I'd envisioned lazy days by the pool, the scent of coconut sunscreen in the air, and the freedom to do absolutely nothing. Instead, I found myself trapped in a nightmare at sea, my dream vacation twisted into a waking horror I couldn't escape. The first few days had been everything I'd hoped for and more. I lounged by the sparkling pool, the sun warming my skin, as I sipped fruity cocktails and lost myself in a paperback novel. At dinner, I made fast friends with a lively group of passengers, a retired couple from Chicago, a young family from Texas, and a witty British expat who kept us in stitches with her stories. I even let myself be coaxed into a salsa dancing class on the Lido deck, my laughter mingling with the rhythm of the music as I stumbled through the steps. By day 4, I was more relaxed than I'd been in years, the stresses of my old life melting away under the Caribbean sun. Then came that first night, I'd fallen asleep easily, lulled by the ship's gentle sway, and perhaps one too many pina coladas at the evening luau. But sometime in the early hours, I jolted awake, every nerve in my body screaming with alarm. At first, I couldn't pinpoint what had disturbed me, my mind foggy with sleep. Then I saw it. My cabin door was wide open, the hallway beyond swallowed by pitch-black darkness. I distinctly remembered locking it before bed, double-checking the deadbolt as I always did, a habit born of years living alone, heart pounding. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet cold against the carpet as I crept toward the door. The corridor was empty, bathed in the faint, eerie green glow of the emergency lighting. I reached for a hand to pull it shut, my breath shallow, when a sound froze me in place, a low, rhythmic scratching like claws dragging across metal, coming from somewhere down the hallway. Panic surged through me, sharp and electric. I slammed the door shut, fumbling with the deadbolt until it clicked into place, my hand shaking so badly I could barely manage it. Sleep was impossible after that. I spent the rest of the night huddled in bed, the covers pulled tight around me, jumping at every creak and groan of the ship's massive frame. When morning finally arrived, painting the cabin with soft golden light, I tried to convince myself it had been a dream, or perhaps a prank by some drunken passengers stumbling back from the late-night bar. But as I made my way to the breakfast buffet, my resolve crumbled. There, marring the pristine walls near my cabin, were long, deep scratches, fresh, jagged gouges that looked like they'd been carved by something with terrifying strength. They hadn't been there the day before. I reported the incident to the purser's desk, my voice trembling as I described what I'd seen and heard. The young man behind the counter, his uniform crisp and his smile practiced, nodded politely as he jotted down my complaint. "We'll look into it, ma'am," he assured me. But I could see the skepticism in his eyes, the faint curl of his lip that said he thought I was just another overwrought retiree imagining things. "It's probably just some wear and tear from luggage carts. These corridors see a lot of traffic." His dismissal stung, but I let it go, not want to seem like the crazy old lady he clearly took me for. I tried to reclaim the carefree spirit of the cruise, throwing myself into the day's activities. Bingo in the lounge, a lecture on Caribbean history, a dip in the hot tub. But the memory of those scratches and that awful sound gnawed at me, a splinter I couldn't dislodge. The next night, it happened again. I woke in the early hours to find my door open, the scratching sounds echoing through the darkness. Closer this time. In the morning, new claw marks had appeared, even nearer to my cabin, their jagged lines a silent threat. The night after that was the same, and the night after that, each incident chipping away at my sanity. I tried talking to other passengers, hoping someone else had noticed something unusual, but they all smiled and shook their heads, their faces bright with vacation bliss. "Maybe you're just not used to the ship's noises," one woman suggested kindly over dinner. "It takes a few days to adjust." The crew was no help either, their responses growing more dismissive with each report. "Too much sun, perhaps?" a steward suggested, his tone infuriatingly patronizing. Or, "Maybe you're still getting your sea legs." By the sixth night, I was a wreck. Dark circles ringed my eyes, my hands shook constantly, and my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. I'd taken to barricading my door with the cabin's furniture, shoving the desk and chair against it before bed, but it made no difference. Whatever was out there always found a way to open that door, its presence a relentless, malevolent force. Which brings me to tonight, night 7. I hadn't slept in 48 hours, too terrified to close my eyes, my body running on adrenaline and sheer stubbornness. The scratching had started earlier this evening. Closer than ever before, the sound so vivid I could almost feel the claws raking against the wood. I'd heard my doorknob rattle, as if something were testing the lock, before the noises fell silent. But I knew better than to relax. It was still out there, waiting, watching, its patience a predator's patience. A soft thud against the door made me flinch, my heart leaping into my throat. Then another thud, and another, almost like knocking. "Hello?" A muffled voice called from the hallway, trembling with fear. "Is anyone in there? Please, I need help." I sat up, my pulse racing. It was a woman's voice, desperate and raw, cutting through the oppressive silence. "The crew won't listen to me." The voice continued, cracking with emotion. "Something's on this ship, something terrible. Please, let me in." Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to keep that door firmly locked, to trust the primal fear that had kept me alive these past nights. But the terror in her voice was so human, so real, it pierced through my defenses. I couldn't just ignore her, not when she sounded as frightened as I felt. Slowly, I crept out of bed, my bare feet silent on the carpet. "Who's there?" I called, pressing my ear to the door, my hand hovering over the deadbolt. "Oh, thank God," the woman replied, her voice thick with relief. "My name's Lisa. I'm in the cabin 2 doors down. Please, you have to let me in. I think it's coming back." I hesitated, my hand trembling on the doorknob. Then I heard it, that familiar scratching sound, growing louder, closer, like a storm rolling in. Fear for her overrode my caution. In one swift motion, I threw open the door, and a figure rushed past me into the room. I slammed the door shut behind her, clicking the deadbolt into place with a satisfying thud. I turned to face my visitor, my breath still coming in short, sharp gasps. Lisa was younger than me, maybe in her early 30s, with long, dark hair tangled and disheveled, as if she'd been running. Her eyes were wide with fear, her face pale, her hands clutching the straps of a small backpack. "Thank you," she gasped, her voice shaking. I didn't think anyone would believe me. "I believe you," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice, a calm born of shared terror. "I've been hearing it too, seeing things." I gestured vaguely toward the door, the memory of those claw marks flashing in my mind. Lisa nodded frantically, her hands twisting the straps of her backpack. The open doors, the claw marks. God, I thought I was going crazy. "What is it? Have you seen it?" I shook my head, sinking onto the edge of my bunk, my legs suddenly weak. "Not clearly, just sounds, scratches, the doors opening when they shouldn't." "You?" "Not clearly either," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Just glimpses, a shadow moving too fast to be human, glowing eyes in the dark." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. "But I've heard it, those awful scratching sounds. And sometimes I think I hear it speaking." A chill ran down my spine, sharp and icy. "Speaking? What does it say?" "I can never make out the words," Lisa said, her eyes distant, haunted. "It's like no language I've ever heard. All growls and clicks, like something ancient, something wrong." I sank back against the wall, my mind reeling. What do we do? The crew won't listen. We can't be the only ones who've noticed something's off. Lisa paced the small cabin, her movements jerky, her hands running through her tangled hair. "I don't know. Maybe we could try to gather evidence. Set up a camera or something. Catch it on video. Force them to take us seriously." I opened my mouth to respond, but a sound stopped me cold. That scratching again, right outside my door, louder and more insistent than ever. This time, it was accompanied by something new, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the walls, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Lisa's eyes went wide, her face draining of what little color remained. "It found us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. We backed away from the door, pressing ourselves against the far wall of the cabin, our breaths shallow and synchronized in our shared terror. The scratching intensified, the wood groaning and splintering as whatever was out there tried to claw its way in. My eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. "The balcony!" I hissed, gesturing to the sliding glass door that led to the small private deck outside. "We need to get out of here." Lisa nodded, and we crept toward the balcony, our movements slow and deliberate, as if any sudden motion might draw the creature's attention. I reached for the handle, my fingers brushing the cool metal, when I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the glass. My blood ran cold, a scream building in my throat. I could see myself clearly, pale, terrified, my eyes wide with fear. But where Lisa's reflection should have been, there was only a shapeless, shadowy mass, its edges writhing like smoke. I spun around, my heart hammering, the scream breaking free as I faced the thing that called itself Lisa. It grinned at me, its face stretching and distorting into something inhuman, its features melting into a grotesque parody of the woman I'd let into my cabin. "Oh, clever," it growled, its voice no longer even pretending to be human, a deep, guttural rasp that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, but not clever enough. I lunged to the balcony door, my fingers scrabbling at the lock, but I was too slow. A clawed hand wrapped around my arm, yanking me back with strength that was impossible, unnatural. I stumbled, falling to my knees, and found myself face to face with the creature. Up close, its appearance was a nightmare made flesh, matted, scaly skin that shimmered with an oily sheen, rows of needle-sharp teeth glinting in the dim light, and glowing yellow eyes that burned with an alien intelligence. Its breath was hot and rancid, a stench of decay that made my stomach churn. "What are you?" I managed to gasp, my voice trembling as I struggled against its iron grip. The creature's mouth stretched wider, a grotesque mockery of a smile. "Old," it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. "Older than this ship, older than the sea itself. And so very, very hungry." Its jaws began to open, impossibly wide, the darkness within its maw seeming to swallow the light. I squeezed my eyes shut, certain that my final moment had come, my mind flashing all the things I'd never do. See my grandchildren grow up, visit Paris, write that novel I'd always dreamed of. But suddenly, the cabin was flooded with blinding light, and the creature screeched, a sound of pain and fury that made my ears ring and my head throb. Its grip on my arm loosened, and I stumbled backward, collapsing against the bunk. I opened my eyes, blinking against the harsh glare, and saw a group of crew members standing in the doorway, wielding powerful flashlights that cast stark beams across the room. But these weren't the smiling, uniformed attendants I'd seen serving drinks or folding towel animals. They wore grim, determined expressions, and in their hands were what looked like high-tech weapons, sleek and unfamiliar, their barrels glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. "Ma'am, are you all right?" one of them asked, a tall man with close-cropped hair and a voice that was calm but urgent. He helped me to my feet, his grip steady and reassuring as my legs threatened to give out. I nodded weakly, my head spinning as I tried to process what was happening. Who are you people?" I stammered. "What was that thing?" The man's expression softened slightly, a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. "We're a specialized security team," he said, choosing his words carefully. "As for what that thing is, let's just say there are creatures in this world that most people aren't ready to know about. Things that sometimes find their way onto cruise ships." I looked around the cabin, my breath catching as I saw the damage. Deep claw marks gouged into the walls and floor that was splintered and raw. Other team members were already moving through the room, examining the marks with clinical precision, their faces unreadable. The creature itself was gone, vanished as if it had never been, leaving only the evidence of its presence and the lingering stench of its breath in the air. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my body trembling with the aftershocks of fear. "Now you get some rest," the man said kindly, his tone almost fatherly. "When you wake up, this will all seem like a bad dream. We'll make sure of it." As if on cue, another team member approached, a woman with a stern face and a small, sleek device in her hand. "This might sting a bit," she said, her voice apologetic. Before I could protest, there was a brief flash of light, bright and disorienting, and then I woke up in my cabin, sunlight streaming to the balcony door, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow. For a moment, I lay there, blinking groggily, trying to shake off the lingering unease of what must have been a vivid nightmare. The details were fuzzy, slipping away like sand through my fingers, but a feeling of dread clung to me, heavy and persistent. I pushed myself out of bed, my body aching as if I'd run a marathon, and began getting ready for another day of vacation. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed workmen patching and repainting the walls, their movements efficient and practiced. Routine maintenance. One of them said with a friendly nod when he caught me staring, his paint roller gliding smoothly over the surface. I nodded back, forcing a smile, but something about the freshly painted walls felt off, as if they were hiding something. I headed up to the pool deck, determined to reclaim the carefree spirit of my vacation. The sun was high, the sky a brilliant blue, and the air was filled with the laughter of children and the clink of glasses. I settled into a lounge chair, the cushions soft and inviting, and accepted a bright blue drink with a little umbrella from a passing waiter. As I sipped it, the sweet, tropical flavor grounding me, I let my gaze wander over the vast expanse of ocean around us, its surface shimmering in the sunlight. But as I relaxed, a nagging thought tugged at the edges of my mind. What secrets were hiding beneath those waves, in the uncharted depths where no light reached? Why did I have the strangest feeling that I glimpsed something I was never meant to see? Something ancient, something hungry. I shook my head, pushing the thoughts away, chalking them up to an overactive imagination and too many late-night horror movies. It was a vacation, after all, a time to relax and enjoy the cruise. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the sun soothe my frayed nerves, the sound of the waves a gentle lullaby. But just as I began to drift, I could have sworn I heard it, a faint, familiar scratching sound, echoing from somewhere deep within the ship, a whisper of terror that refused to be silenced. The first rays of dawn crept over the jagged peaks of the Cascade Mountains, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and gold. But the light revealed a scene that twisted my stomach into knots, a tableau straight out of a nightmare. Our campsite, once a cozy haven nestled in the heart of the wilderness, was now encircled by a perfect ring of animal carcasses. Dozens of them, rabbits, squirrels, even a few deer, arranged with a chilling precision that no natural force could ever achieve. Their lifeless bodies lay in eerily symmetrical positions, as if placed by a meticulous, unseen hand. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat, horror rooting me to the spot. Then, a sharp snap of a twig in the underbrush shattered the silence. We weren't alone out here, and whatever had created this macabre display was still watching, its presence a heavy weight in the morning air. This was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway, a chance to reconnect with my three closest friends from college, Mark, Sarah, and Rachel. After 5 years of drifting apart, our lives pulled in different directions by careers and responsibilities. We'd chosen a remote spot deep in the Cascade Mountains, miles from the nearest town or cell phone signal. The perfect place to disconnect from the world and relive the carefree days of our youth. The drive up had been filled with laughter and excited chatter, the kind of easy camaraderie that only old friends can share. Mark, ever the daredevil, regaled us with tales of his latest extreme sports adventures, skydiving in Costa Rica, whitewater rafting in Colorado, his voice brimming with infectious enthusiasm. Sarah, now a high-powered lawyer in Seattle, grumbled good-naturedly about the lack of Wi-Fi, her fingers twitching as if longing for a phone. And Rachel, quiet and thoughtful as always, simply smiled, her eyes drinking in the gorgeous scenery as we wound our way up the twisting mountain roads, the towering pines and distant snow-capped peaks a breathtaking backdrop. We reached the trailhead by mid-afternoon, the sun still high but casting long shadows through the dense forest. Shouldering our backpacks, we set off on the 3-mile hike to our campsite, our boots crunching on the pine needle-strewn path. The forest was a living cathedral, its towering pines stretching toward the sky, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Babbling brooks crisscrossed the trail, their crystal-clear water sparkling in the sunlight, and every so often, we caught glimpses of the rugged peaks in the distance, their snowy caps glinting like beacons. As we walked, the stresses of our daily lives, deadlines, emails, the constant buzz of notifications, seemed to melt away, replaced by a sense of freedom and wonder. "Man, we should do this more often," Mark said, pausing to inhale deeply, his broad grin lighting up his face. "When was the last time any of us just stopped and smelled the pine trees?" We all murmured in agreement, our voices soft, almost reverent. It felt good to be out here, far from the clamor of modern life, surrounded by the raw beauty of nature. Sarah adjusted her backpack, a playful smirk on her lips. "Speak for yourself, Mark. I'm already missing my espresso machine." Rachel chuckled, her quiet laugh blending with the rustle of leaves. "Give it a day, Sarah. You'll forget all about your coffee addiction." By the time we reached our designated campsite, the sun was dipping below the tree line, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and purples. The clearing was perfect, a small, flat expanse of ground next to a crystal-clear stream, its gentle burble a soothing counterpoint to the forest's quiet hum. A ring of stones marked an old fire pit, and the surrounding pines offered a natural windbreak. "This is it," I said, dropping my pack with a satisfied sigh. Home sweet home for weekend. Sarah and Rachel set to work pitching the tents, their movements practiced from years of camping together in college. Mark and I headed into the woods to gather firewood, the air growing crisp as the temperature dropped rapidly with the approaching night. "Hey, check this out," Mark called, crouching near the edge of the clearing, his flashlight beam illuminating the soft earth. "Weird tracks." I joined him, my curiosity piqued. In the dirt near the tree line were a set of prints unlike anything I'd seen before, large, easily twice the size of my own boot print, with 5 distinct toe marks. But the shape was all wrong, too elongated and narrow for a bear or mountain lion, the edges too sharp for a deer. A faint unease stirred in my chest, but I pushed it down, forcing a casual tone. "Probably just a deformed deer or something," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Come on, let's get this fire started." Mark shrugged, his usual bravado unshaken, and we returned to our task, piling dry branches into the fire pit. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, the flames casting a warm, flickering glow across our faces. We roasted marshmallows, a sweet, smoky scent mingling with the crisp pine air, and shared stories that had us doubled over with laughter. Memories of late-night study sessions, disastrous frat parties, and the time Mark tried to borrow a campus golf cart and ended up stuck in a ditch. Sarah, ever the storyteller, recounted her latest courtroom drama with theatrical flair, while Rachel listened quietly, her eyes reflecting the firelight, a soft smile playing on her lips. It was nearly midnight when we finally crawled into our tents, our bellies full and our hearts light. I zipped up my sleeping bag, the sound of the nearby stream lulling me into a contented daze. Sleep came quickly, my body sinking into the familiar comfort of the wilderness. I'm not sure what woke me. Some animal sound, perhaps, or that primal sixth sense that tells you something isn't right. The first thing I noticed was a silence, oppressive and unnatural. The stream still burbled softly, but the usual nighttime chorus of the forest, the hoot of owls, the rustle of small creatures, the chirp of crickets, was gone, as if the woods were holding their breath. Then I heard it, a soft thud just outside the tent, followed by another and another, deliberate and close. My heart kicked into overdrive, adrenaline flooding my system. "Guys," I whispered, nudging Mark awake, my voice barely audible. "Do you hear that?" He sat up, groggy and disoriented, rubbing his eyes. "Hear what?" Before I could answer, a blood-curdling scream split the night, a sound so raw and unnatural it made my skin crawl. It was almost human, but distorted, as if it came from a throat not designed for human speech, a guttural wail that echoed through the trees. We were out of the tent in seconds, flashlights in hand, our breaths visible in the cold night air. Sarah and Rachel emerged from their tent across the clearing, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. What the hell was that? Sarah hissed, clutching her flashlight like a weapon. I swept my beam around the campsite, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. That's when I saw it. The The first body, a rabbit. Its small form laid out on the ground just at the edge of the clearing. Its neck twisted at an unnatural angle, its eyes glazed over in death. A few feet away lay another, a squirrel this time, its tiny body arranged with the same eerie precision. "Oh my God," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling as she pointed her flashlight further out. "Look." We followed her gaze, our beams revealing more and more dead animals. Dozens of them, forming a perfect circle around our campsite. Rabbits, squirrels, even a few deer, each one placed with meticulous care, their lifeless forms a grotesque parody of order. The sight was so surreal, so wrong, that my mind struggled to process it, a wave of nausea rising in my throat. "We need to get out of here," Mark said, his usual bravado nowhere to be found, his voice tight with fear. No one argued. We scrambled to grab our essentials, phones, water bottles, jackets, leaving the tents and most of our gear behind. But as we turned to head back down the trail, a low growl stopped us cold, rumbling from the darkness just beyond the circle of carcasses. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, catching a glimpse of matted fur and a flash of yellow eyes reflecting the beam, glowing with an unnatural intensity. My stomach dropped, a primal terror seizing me. "Run," I yelled, and we took off down the trail, crashing through the forest, branches whipping at our faces as we ran. The underbrush seemed to claw at us, roots catching at our feet, as if the forest itself were conspiring to slow us down. Behind us, I could hear heavy footsteps, deliberate in gaining ground, the sound of something large and relentless pursuing us through the darkness. My lungs burned, my legs screaming with effort, but fear drove me forward, the image of those glowing eyes seared into my mind. Suddenly, Mark cried out, his voice sharp with pain. I turned to see him sprawled on the ground, clutching his ankle, his face contorted in agony. "I tripped," he gasped, his breath ragged. "I think it's sprained. Go on without me." "Like hell we will," Sarah snapped, already moving to help him up, her loyally composure replaced by fierce determination. Rachel and I each grabbed one of Mark's arms, half carrying him as we continued down the trail, his weight slowing us but not stopping us. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, the heavy thud of footsteps now accompanied by low, guttural growls that seemed to vibrate through the air. We rounded a bend and found ourselves at the edge of a small cliff, maybe 15 feet high. The stream we'd camped near glinting below in the moonlight, its surface a silver ribbon in the darkness. "We have to jump," I said, my voice trembling with the insanity of the idea, my eyes darting to the water below. "Are you insane?" Sarah exclaimed, her face pale. "We don't know how deep it is." A roar from just behind us, deafening and primal, made the decision for us. Without another word, we leaped, the shock of the cold water driving the air from my lungs. For a disorienting moment, I was submerged, the current tugging at me, my sense of direction lost in the icy darkness. Then my head broke the surface, and I gulped in great lungfuls of air, my body shaking from cold and adrenaline. "Everyone okay?" I called out, treading water as I scanned the surface for my friends. 3 voices answered, weak but alive. "Here," Sarah shouted, her head bobbing a few feet away. Rachel and Mark were nearby, clinging to each other, their faces pale but determined. We swam to the shore, hauling ourselves onto the muddy bank, our clothes soaked and heavy, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Did you see it?" Rachel asked, her teeth chattering from cold and fear, her eyes darting back toward the cliff. We all shook our heads, too shaken to speak. Whatever had been chasing us hadn't followed us over the cliff, its absence a small mercy in the chaos of the night. As the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of our situation sank in. We were soaking wet, miles from civilization, with no supplies and no idea what was out there hunting us. Our phones were useless, the lack of signal a cruel reminder of how isolated we were. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice small, echoing the question that weighed on all our minds. I was about to suggest we start hiking toward the ranger station we'd pass on our way in, a faint hope of safety, when a twig snapped nearby, sharp and deliberate. We all froze, our flashlights swinging toward the sound, their beams trembling in our hands. There, at the edge of the small clearing where we'd landed, stood something, a massive, vaguely humanoid figure, standing on two legs, but any resemblance to a person ended there. It was easily 8 feet tall, its body covered in shaggy, matted fur that ranged from dark brown to a sickly gray, tangled with bits of leaves and dirt. Its face was a nightmare blend of bear and wolf, with a protruding snout filled with razor-sharp teeth that glinted in the moonlight. And its eyes, those glowing yellow eyes I glimpsed earlier, burned with an unnatural intelligence, watching us with predator's calm. For a long, agonizing moment, we stood motionless, prey caught in the gaze of a hunter, our breaths shallow, our bodies trembling. My mind reeled, struggling to reconcile the creature before us with reality. This wasn't a bear, a cougar, or any animal I'd ever studied in a biology class. It was something else, something ancient, something that belonged to the realm of myth and shadow. Then, to my utter astonishment, it spoke. "You not belong," it growled, the words guttural and barely intelligible, rumbling from deep within its chest like stones grinding together. "This our place." My knees nearly buckled, the shock of its voice shattering what little composure I had left. It could talk? The impossibility of it overwhelmed me, my mind scrambling for an explanation. Was this some kind of hallucination? A shared delusion born of fear and exhaustion? But the creature's presence was undeniable, its massive form filling the clearing, its breath visible in the cold night air. "We're sorry," I said, finding my voice, though it trembled with fear and awe. "We didn't know. We'll leave, I promise." The creature regarded us silently, its alien eyes unreadable, its head tilted slightly as if weighing our words. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, each second an eternity. Then, slowly it nodded, its shaggy head dipping in a gesture that was almost human. "Go!" it rumbled, its voice carrying a finality that brooked no argument. "Never return." None of us needed to be told twice. We set off down the stream, Mark limping but mobile, his face grim with pain but determined. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see those glowing eyes following us, but the creature remained where it was, a sentinel watching us flee its domain. The forest seemed to part for us, the branches less obstructive, the path clearer in the growing light of dawn. By the time we reached the ranger station, the sun was fully up, its warmth a stark contrast to the terror of the night. We told the rangers a sanitized version of events, that we'd been spooked by some animal noises, and gotten lost trying to hike out in the dark. They raised their eyebrows, their skepticism clear, but they didn't press us, instead calling a rescue team to retrieve our abandoned gear. As we waited for our ride back to civilization, I found myself staring up at the mountains, their majestic peaks now tinged with an aura of menace. They were beautiful, yes, but they were also wild, untamed, and full of secrets we'd only begun to glimpse. "Hey!" Sarah said softly, coming to stand beside me, her arms crossed against the morning chill. "You okay?" I nodded slowly, my eyes still fixed on the distant peaks. "Yeah, I think so. It's just, what do you think that thing was?" She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze following mine. "I don't know," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm not sure I want to know. Some things are better left as mysteries." As we piled into the ranger's truck for the drive back to our car, I couldn't help but agree. The mountains had shown us something beyond our understanding, something that challenged everything we thought we knew about the world. Part of me was tempted to go back, to seek answers to the questions swirling in my mind. What was that creature? Where had it come from? How long had it been hiding in these woods? But a larger part, the part that had stared into those glowing eyes and felt the weight of an ancient presence, knew better. Some corners of the wilderness were not meant for us to explore. As we drove away, the mountains receding in the rear-view mirror, I made a silent promise to myself. I would return to the wilderness someday, drawn by its beauty and its mysteries. But next time, I would come with more respect, more humility, and a lot less certain about my place in the natural order of things. The forest had taught us a lesson, one written in blood and fear. There were forces out there, ancient and unknowable, that demanded our awe and our caution. And sometimes, the wisest thing to do was to leave them be, to let the wild keep its secrets while we carried our own, a story of survival, of terror, and the humbling truth that we were but guests in a world far older and stranger than we could ever imagine.